Okay, I'm recording now. I think.
Or handle internet.
Let me rename this Bible study. We haven't done one of these in forever. The last time we did these, we weren't just audio, and Levi would play like Duck Game in the background or whatever. Like I start recording it. Everybody stops talking.
I mean,
Well,
what else do you want us to
What are
say?
we
What do you want us
Bible
to say?
study?
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Anyway, let's get
We're
into
here
it.
to listen to you yap about the Bible.
We're gonna start in Exodus 18. Let me grab my copy of the Septuagint so I can look at both at the same time. After we read normal Exodus, like in a future Bible study, we should read from the Targums because they're just better. They're more fun. Okay, Exodus. We're starting from Exodus 18 because I wanted to read all of the boring parts of the Bible because they're actually not very boring at all. They just require a lot of context.
Except for the genealogies.
Oh, well, no, I'm not going there. That would be actually too boring.
Yeah.
No, but I just mean like the whole like take the fatty part of the liver and wave it above the kidney and like. Anyway, here we go. Genesis 18. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Verse 1. Who's Jethro?
Moses' father-in-law.
And what else is he?
Jethro Tull is an awesome
A
band
high
in the 80s.
priest?
That's right, he's a priest. He's not a high priest, because that's not a thing for the Midianites yet. And what's his real name? Because it's not Jethro. This is a niche question.
Hibbs.
It's Reuel.
Clarence.
And we know that because it's in like Exodus 2, and I think it's Numbers 18 or 22. It says it as well. Jethro is a title for Midianite priests. So his name's not really Jethro. His name's Reuel. And his son's name is Hobab. Anyway, that's all there is to be said about that. Actually, there is some important stuff, right? Because who are the Midianites, right? Like I said, Jethro is a Midianite. But who are the Midianites? Well, the Midianites were essentially a clan of Ishmaelites and Edomites. Okay, well, who are those guys? Ishmaelites are from Ishmael, right? And the Edomites are from Esau. So they're children of Abraham, right? They're descendants of Abraham, but they're not Israelites. And the reason I bring this up is because if we ever actually read the entirety of Exodus, which we will, hopefully, at some point, because I hope to make these Bible studies more regular like they used to be, we'll see that, like, the whole modern conception of, like, basically people equivocate Jew and Israelite as if those are the same thing. And I don't even mean, like someone might hear me when I say that and think, oh, he's opposing modern Judaism and the ancient Israelites. No. The Jews in the Old Testament are not the same thing as the Israelites in the Old Testament, right? Because Jews are from the Northern Kingdom and Israelites are just all the North and Southern Kingdom together. So there's a subtle difference there, which is important. But yeah, anyway, so the point is Jethro's descended either from Ishmael or from Esau. And this is how you get all this weird stuff in modern, like, Chiliasm stuff, right? Where they'll talk about how the Israelites never took all of the land that was promised to them. And they're both wrong and right. They're wrong in the sense that in the book of Joshua, it literally says, let me pull it up real quick. Long pause.
Should we hum elevator music?
Yeah, here it is. It's It's
Yeah,
Joshua 21, 43 through 45. Quote, "Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies hath withstood them, for the Lord hath given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the promises regarding the land that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. And then if you actually read the Old Testament and you like look at the land that they took and you like draw a map of it, right? Because it just says like Joshua took this place, took this place. And then you look at the land that was promised to Abraham. Like the Israelites took like basically none of, in terms of like proportion, the land that was promised to Abraham, right? So how can it say they took all the land, and then you go look and you look at the land that was promised to Abraham's descendants, and it's like way bigger than what they took? And the simple answer is because the land was not promised only to the Israelites; it was promised to Abraham's descendants, which includes the Midianites, the Caphtharim, and in Deuteronomy 2, which we might get to later, God literally tells the Israelites, I've divvied up the land like this, and you're not allowed to take a single foot of another piece of land. And it literally says a foot. It says the length of a foot. Yeah. And then this is what Paul makes reference to in Malachi, right, where he says, Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated. That's the quote from the beginning of Malachi. Did I say Paul says in Malachi? I meant Paul says in Romans. It's the quote from Malachi. But there, in the context of Malachi, he's not actually speaking about Jacob and Esau as persons. He's speaking about the Israelites and the Edomites. The very next verse is, if the Edomites build up, I will destroy again. Because the Edomites are the descendants of Esau. Anyway, all that to say, Jethro is a priest, and notice that he's going to be living with the Israelites because, it's not like they knew about DNA back then. As we're going to see, Israel is very ethnically diverse, and I'm not saying that because I'm a woke postmodernist. That's just a fact. Anyway, so all that to say, that's who Jethro is. He's a Midianite priest, and he's Moses' father-in-law. His name's Reuel. His son is Hobab. Anyway, verse 2.
Incredible.
Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her home, along with her 2 sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. And the name of the other Eleazar, for he said, the God of my father was my help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. So notice he refers to the God of his father. Because again, it's just like, who is his father? Right, like, for the Israelites, right, you hear in Israelite literature all the time, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But unironically, and like this isn't like hypothesis, this is archaeology. In terms of Midianite religion, you have like the God of our father, Abraham, and Lot. Because that's how it worked back there, right? Because they had, one might even say, you can make a comparison to the churches. In fact, Paul makes this comparison, right? This is why in Orthodox we have ethnically diverse churches. Because Paul says that we've been grafted into the tree, but he also holds the distinction between Greeks and Jews even still. And how we know that? Well, we know that because he circumcised Timothy, Paul did, but he did not circumcise Titus. So when he says that we're grafted into the same tree, he does not destroy the difference between the branches, right? And then someone will bring up the point where he says there's neither Jew nor Greek. But in that case, he's talking about the glorification and the inheritance. He's not talking about ritualism. Right. Anyway. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness where he was encamped at the mountain of God. And the mountain of God in Hebrew is Har Moed. And if you're Greek and you want to transliterate that word into Greek, you say Harmogeddon, or Armageddon. That's where we get that word. And that's why in Revelation, right, it refers to Armageddon. And a lot of people will be like, oh, well, that's this valley in Israel. The problem with that is that valley in Israel was not called Armageddon until like the 3rd century A.D. So it could not be referring to that. Or I guess it could, right, because it's like prophecy and all that. But it's probably not, considering that it was written to people, and those people would have understood it in the way that they understood it. Anyway, so Mountain of God. And when he sent word to Moses, quote, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons with her, end quote. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them in the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Jethro said, "Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people." And here, Jethro isn't being like, "I didn't know this before," right? But now I know that he's greater than all the gods. That's just a turn of phrase. And that's all throughout the Old Testament. Right? Like, even God says to the Israelites and to, like, particular people, "Then you shall know that I am the Lord." He doesn't mean, like, "I know you guys are confused about this." He's saying, like, then it'll be made clear. In other words, like, you'll really know, you know? Like, you see Batman, but you only really know he's Batman when he beats the crap out of everybody. Then you know he's Batman. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is that? What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make them know the statutes of God and his laws." Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. Now obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God, and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and laws, and make them known, and make them know the way in which they should walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring before you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you, you will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace." So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law, and did all that he said. Moses chose able men out of all of Israel, and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And they judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went away into his own country. So how many of those guys were there? Pop quiz. How many judges, so to speak, or elders, you might say, did Moses appoint?
Well, 72.
Yeah, 72. And so when Jesus picks the 72 apostles to go out before him in pairs to every town, right, in Luke 10:10, he's deliberately setting himself up as a new Moses, right? Because there's 12 patriarchs in Israel, right? Because you have 12 tribes, but at any given time, there's always a head of a tribe, and that's a patriarch. And then you have the 72 elders established by Moses, and sometimes there's more than 72, because, you know, there was only 72 apostles for a bit, and then there was way more, right?
Yeah.
But what do you think? All of those elders together, what were they called?
That I don't know.
The Sanhedrin.
Right.
And so yeah, this persists all the way up to the New Testament, even though it's not. It's all throughout the Bible, but it's not in every single verse, right? And there's whole books of the Bible that don't mention this persistence, such as Isaiah, right? But where it does get mentioned in the New Testament is Jesus says in Matthew 23:2-3, quote, he said, quote, so Matthew begins, right, and then Jesus says, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All, therefore, whatsoever they bid you, observe. That observe and do." Oh, come on. Sorry, let me switch to something that's not the KJV. The KJV is unreadable. Here we go. This is the ESV. "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach, but they do not practice." So this is important, right? Because Jesus is not like some hippie revolutionary Do your own thing. He's not Protestant. We know that because he tells everyone, do what the people who Moses said they had authority over you tell you to do. And in other places, Jesus particularly critiques the Pharisees for making harsh rulings. But notice he doesn't tell people not to do the rulings. Right? That's why he says to the Pharisees, you shut the door to those who seek entry to the kingdom of heaven. Well, how is that possible? What does that even mean? How do they even have the authority to shut the door? Well, because they're the one who make rulings. So what he's literally saying is like, you guys are being too hard on the people, and so it's hard for Jews to exist, basically. But what does that language sound like, right? When he says to the Pharisees, "You shut the door. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven." And what do the Second Temple Jews, such as in the Babylonian Exegete and in tons of apocryphal literature, what do they call the authority of the Sanhedrin about making rulings? They called it the authority to bind and to loose. So if you were a Jew and you heard Jesus say to Peter and to the rest of the apostles, right, I give you the kingdom, I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind and loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Sorry, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And I say that he said that to all of the apostles because, admittedly, there's only recorded of him giving the keys to Peter, but he says that the rest of that phrase to all the apostles later on. So basically, the apostles are the new patriarchs and elders. I mean, that's very obvious just with the number, right? 12 patriarchs, 12 apostles, 72 elders, 72 apostles, right? And this is why we have bishops. And you notice that in the New Testament, when Paul tells Timothy, right, to go make presbyters, he says, by the laying on of your hands. And again, Paul's not throwing everything away, right? And this is a big misnomer, is that, like, as Christians, the Old Testament is a historical book, and nothing that it says matters. And we know that's not the case, because, all throughout the New Testament, it's like, do I abolish the law by this faith? By no means. On the contrary. I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And that word fulfill is fill to full, or add to. Not, I didn't abolish it, I did another thing, which is the same thing as abolishing it. No, it's literally add to, right? That's why he says things like, a new commandment I give to you. And another indicator that the law isn't abolished is what Paul says, right? He says, and this is a quote, he says, do we then abolish the law by our faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. And then that's not even the important part. The next important part is, but the law of commandments as expressed in ordinances has been renewed. And then he goes on to say, because of the crucifixion and stuff, and the resurrection. But what does that actually mean? That it's renewed. Well, Paul talks about this again in Hebrews. Hebrews is basically about this. Got sniffles. He says, let me find it real quick. Yeah, Hebrews 7. Starting from verse 11. Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron? So that one who's in the order of Melchizedek is obviously Jesus. And then the next verse is the most important part here. For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. What do you mean, Paul? We don't do the law anymore. So what are the changes in the law? Well, that's what the canons of the church are, right? And that's, for example, you have the apostolic constitutions as recorded by Hippolytus. It's not like we don't know the changes the apostles made. And even in Hebrews, right? He's going to tell them, you don't do the Day of Atonement ritual anymore, because that already happened now. Notice, if Paul says, don't do this ritual anymore, what does that imply about all the rituals he doesn't tell people not to do?
That you have to still do them.
Right. That's why he says to Timothy, by the laying on of your hands. Right? He's not like, let me make up a new ritual to ordain priests. No. Right? That's just the way the Jews did it from time immemorial. And there's even rabbinical ordinations, right? And Paul would have went through one, and that's how he did those as well. And again, it's the important part that I'm trying to accentuate about the laying on of hands is it's not like they literally just like put hands on you and then they go, you're a priest now, right? Like people do nowadays. Paul is using that phrase to sum up the whole ritual. And as we're going to see if we keep going in Exodus, and I don't ramble on 3 verses so we never get anywhere, there's tons and tons of rituals that are not abolished, but the law of commandments as expressed in ordinances has been renewed, right? So they're renewed in Christ. For example, we're going to see that Aaron has the names of his 2 sons on his shoulders in the vestments, right? Why? Because they were serving with him, and so all the other priests, and there were big rocks there on their shoulders, and it particularly speaks about the weight of the rocks because it's supposed to be like pushing down on Aaron, constantly reminding him that as high priest, he is the one who holds up the priests, right? And their weight rests on him. And the bishops, right? Those are the new high priests, and the priests are still the priests. And so if you've ever been to, if you've ever seen a hierarchical liturgy, right, where the bishop comes and serves liturgy, you'll notice that in a particular spot in the hierarchical liturgy, the priest kisses the shoulder of the bishop. Well, why is that? Well, that's because of all this stuff way back here in Exodus. Or like, for example, when it's talking about dividing the Thanksgiving offerings into different parts, right? Be it animals, it tells you how to do that with animals. And if it's bread, it tells you how to do it with bread. Well, if you look at prosphora, right? The bread made for the Eucharist, right? The middle part is taken out for the Eucharist. But what happens to the rest of it? Well, the top part of the prosphora gets given to the priests for them to commune with, and the bottom part gets given to the people. And you read the animal sacrifices in the way that they're carved up, and that's exactly the way it's carved up. So understanding Exodus and Leviticus and all this really boring stuff, well, one, if you just understand it's not boring anymore, but 2, it'll completely change the way you look at the liturgy and all that stuff. Anyway, what verse were we on? Exodus 19, I think? Yeah.
Great question.
I think so. On the 3rd new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came to the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain, while Moses went up to God. Oh, also I should say, right, you're reading Exodus, and what just happened? Well, what just happened was Moses appointed a whole bunch of people to judge disputes and things of ritualism, right? And so in the next chapter, we're going to see a whole bunch of laws. Well, why would you have a whole bunch of laws? Well, because, right, or why didn't the law get given earlier, so to speak? Well, because earlier you didn't have to have a law that a whole bunch of people could reference, right? Because God could just tell Moses, and then Moses would do whatever. But now you have a whole bunch of people, so there has to be a law code for them to reference when they're making their judgments about these disputes. And this is why, again, people have this completely incoherent, ridiculous view of the law, that it's like a thing that is permanent and must be applied in all cases. And as we're going to see, there's parts of the law that say, for example, I believe it's there's a part of the law that says if 2 guys get into a fight and one of their wives is pregnant and somehow she gets hit in this fight between the 2 men, if the baby dies, he'll be put to death. And then the next verse says, but if he has to pay a fine, he will pay 7 times the fine, as decided by the husband or the wife. And it's like, well, what do you mean if he has to pay a fine? You just said he had to be put to death. And it's like, no, because these are maximum penalties, right? So, for example, it also says anyone who disrespects their parents gets put to death. Well, not only do I think that yeah. And also, you have this whole idea about the law, right, that, well, the wages of sin is death, right? So the reason there's so much death penalty is because, when you do something bad, you deserve to die. The issue with that view is that there's certain things in the law where it's a sin, obviously, and it does not require of you the death penalty. So the point of the law is not just to enumerate all of the bad stuff you could ever possibly do and say, oh yeah, you deserve to die for that too, you deserve to die for that too. One, just because that would be a waste of Moses, God, and everybody else's time. It's actually a very practical law code, and it's speaking of maximum penalties and ritualism. Anyway, I'm jumping the gun here. Where was I? The Lord called him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel." So Moses came and called the elders of the people, and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." And Moses reported the words of the people to God. Notice Paul references this as well. It's worth noting that this is a covenant. Right, so a covenant and a promise is not the same thing. A covenant is a deal, right, so you keep up your end and I'll keep up my end. And a promise is a promise. And as we're going to see, one of the ritualisms prescribed in Leviticus is that when someone becomes a priest, part of the ordination ritual is they would take the birds, turtle doves, or a pigeon for a sacrifice, and they would cut it in half down the middle, and they would walk through it, and they would say, "If I don't keep the promises to God, let me be like this pigeon." So, like, cut me in half, God, if I break these promises. And if we look and we go back, and we look at the promises God made to Abraham, God told Abraham to take those same birds, a turtle dove and a pigeon, and cut them in half. And then it says that the cloud, like the theophanic glory cloud, went between the pigeons. So what's God saying there to Abraham? God's saying, if I don't keep my promises, let me be like these birds. Now, of course, we know God's going to keep his promises because he's God. But God's making a certain point there about the nature of what he said to Abraham versus what he said to Moses. And Paul's point in the New Testament about the Gentiles, even though they don't keep the ritualism, is that does not mean that they cannot be saved, right? Which is what the Judaizers were saying, right? They were saying, well, to partake of the Eucharist, to be part of the people of God, etc., you have to be Jewish, so get circumcised. And Paul's not saying, no, don't get circumcised, you Jews, right? Neither is he saying, everybody has to get circumcised. What Paul's saying is very nuanced. He's saying, sure, Jews be circumcised, right? Circumcision is indeed of value if you keep the law. But if you do not keep the law, your circumcision has become uncircumcision, right? And here, keep the law does not mean, again, people have this idea that, like, if you've ever sinned, you didn't keep the law. It's like, no. We know that's not the case because Paul says, and this is a quote, "According to the righteousness which is in the law, I am blameless." And in the Old Testament, God says to the prophet Nathan after David's dead, "I desire that you perfectly obey the law as my servant David did." It's like, what do you mean? He killed a guy. Well, yeah, he killed a guy, but then he offered the proper sacrifices and paid the proper price that one is supposed to do after they kill somebody. Because in the law, it includes not just, don't do bad things, but if you do those bad things, here's what you're then supposed to go and do. And so if it were not possible to keep the law, also in the law, like God literally says in Deuteronomy, what I have commanded you is not too difficult for you. So he expressly says, it's not impossible for you to do this. All that is to say, people's view of the law is completely incorrect nowadays because they've never actually read the boring parts of the Old Testament because they're boring. My point about Abraham. Paul's point about Abraham is that the law, the covenant made with Moses, cannot annul the promise made to Abraham. So that's Paul's point, because this is a covenant and that was a promise. Anyway. So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. All the people answered together and said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." And Moses reported the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I am coming to you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe you forever." When Moses told the words of the people to the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, Take care not to go up to the mountain or to touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death." Now, put to death here, kind of a silly translation. Whoever shall come to the mountain shall surely die is probably better. Yeah, actually, what it literally says, like pulling up the Hebrew, is he shall not live. Whether beast or man, he shall not live. What is it? When the trumpet sounds a long. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping ahead of myself. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot, whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain. So when Moses went down from the mountain, stoned or shot. That's a weird way to put that. What is that word? Shot through. Interesting. I wonder what that actually means. Like, what would the mechanism be there? Anyway. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people, and they washed their garments. And he said to the people, "Be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman." What is this? Huh? Oh, I thought you said something.
No.
What does this remind you of?
Probably like arrows.
Yeah, probably. I just typically don't think about the Israelites as having bows and arrows, but I guess they obviously would.
Block.
But this part where it says, "Be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman." There's a certain canon, right, that on Saturdays you're not supposed to have sex. Why? Because the next day is the third day, right? It's the day of resurrection. And then obviously it's like, okay, well, why? So that tells us why we don't have sex on Saturdays. But why did God command that here? And the answer is basically because, like, you don't want to be distracted. And even in the canons, right, they talk about this, about particularly deacons in particular. Because, I actually just read this in my essay, Why Not Catholicism? Because the Roman Church was saying, they were saying that priests can't get married or whatever. Even before the schism, they were saying that. And so the other churches repudiated it. They said, no, you can't say that. And they said that in the ecumenical councils, by the way, which just goes to show that the Catholics claim that the councils are infallible, but they obviously don't actually believe it. Because in the councils, it literally says that you are not allowed to prohibit a priest from getting married. That is, to stop one from who is married from becoming a priest. But my point there is that in the council, it goes, but, right, even though we say, yes, men who are married can take over the priesthood, but we still say that they shouldn't have sex on Saturday. Why? Because when they're handling the holy things, you don't want them to be thinking about their wife. And I know what you're thinking, because I thought this too. Like, for some people, if they had sex with their wife on Saturday, wouldn't that actually help alleviate them not be distracted on Sunday? And the answer is yes. And the bishops talk about that. St. Basil talks about that. Particularly one of his priests, right, because he was a bishop, is like, it basically came to him and was like, said that. And he was like, yeah, that's fine then. And I say that to go to show as well that it's not legalism, right? Because it's not like, again, like I just said about the law. It's for the bishops, which are the elders, right, to enforce. And the law, or the canons, same thing, right? Tell them what the maximum penalty is. That doesn't mean they have to enforce the maximum penalty. So St. Basil can say to his priest, yeah, okay, it's okay if you have sex on Saturday. Because he's the bishop, and he's the one who the law was meant to be used by. That's another thing, right? If the Bible is sola scriptura, who is this telling to do the thing? Right? Is it saying you, individual Christian, or Israelite, right? Because if it's sola scriptura, it's always been sola scriptura. So you, individual Israelite, go kill those random people. That's your job, because I wrote it down in this magic book. No! That would be anarchy. Anyway. Verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud on the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Okay, so third day, right? Then on the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud and a very loud trumpet blast. And so you read, I think it's in Ezekiel, right, the Valley of Dry Bones, which the fathers interpret as being about the resurrection of the other people at Christ's resurrection, right, in Matthew 27. And then where do they go? They go to the foot of the mountain where God is. Now, where is the mountain of God? Right? Obviously, the mountain of God moves around, right? There's Mount Sinai, it's Mount Tabor, it's Mount Carmel, it's Mount Hermon. No, sorry, not Hermon. It's Mount Horeb. But particularly in the prophets, right? So in Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah, in Revelation, the mountain of God refers to the Garden of Eden. And we know that the Garden of Eden is a mountain, one, because it gets referred to as the mountain of God in those texts I just mentioned, but also because if you read Genesis carefully, there's 4 rivers flowing from Eden. Well, if there's 4 rivers flowing from a place, that place has to be higher than the rest of it. So it's at least a very large hill. And a large hill for the ancient Near East is a mountain. and you know that just because when you read, Mount Tabor is a thing, right? We call it Mount Tabor. You go there, it's like, is that a mountain? I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, so this is meant to parallel the resurrection of everybody.
They're
Hence,
probably taller a few thousand years ago.
probably, but I mean, some of them we know that weren't that much taller.
True.
But even Mount Tabor, right? Like Mount Tabor is in the New Testament, and even in the time of the New Testament, it's like a large hill. To the extent that the fathers say maybe the reason they called it a mountain was to parallel with the Old Testament, because this is not a mountain. Anyway, on the morning of the third, I just read that. That's right. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, and the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down and warn the people, lest they break through to the Lord to look, and many of them perish. Also, let the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them." What does that mean? Well, it just means, make themselves holy. And we're going to get, particularly, because again, this is, when God's going to describe to Moses the ways that he's supposed to, put the gold on stuff and make the tabernacle and all that, he's going to tell him over and over, according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain. So what does it mean to consecrate themselves? Well, we can actually find out more of what it means to consecrate themselves later. Because we can read the description of the building of the tabernacle as a sort of elaboration on what Moses might have seen on this mountain. Anyway, continuing on. Verse 24, "And the Lord said to him, 'Go down and come up, bringing Aaron with you. But do not let the priests and the people break through to come up to the Lord, lest he break out against them.' So Moses went down to the people and told them. And God spoke all these words, saying," so here we have the 10 Commandments. And how many commandments are there in the 10 Commandments?
9.
Yes, 9. Will, you can talk. We all know you're in the Women's Protection Program. Hey, you listener. If you are looking for a man whose name is now Will Hassenfritz, who his first family died in some Ohio car crash, he's on this podcast or Bible study or whatever this is. Come join the Discord server, and I can tell you where he lives, and you can kill him. Anyway.
Okay.
So how do we get, if there's 9 commandments, how do we get the 10 commandments?
You split one up.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but why did they want to split one off to begin with? Why didn't they just say there were 9 commandments?
Because 10 sounds
Oh,
better.
what does it parallel?
Oh, it doesn't parallel anything. No, the answer is actually much more boring.
Iconoclasm.
The reason it is because of this first sentence, verse 2, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." The reason that that's important is because the Jews call this passage the Decalogue, which means the 10 phrases. And that there is the first phrase. And so as, theological drift happened over time, people forgot that it was the 10 phrases, but they preserved the number 10, and so you get the 10 commandments. And then somewhere along the way, somebody counted them, and they were like, "There's not 10 commandments here." So they split in verse 17, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's." They count that as 2, or sometimes they count, you guys said this, sometimes they count another one as 2, I don't remember which one it is. Oh, it's,
Yeah, it's not. I've never personally seen it counted that way. I've seen it as the first 2 being.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah. And the reason that we know that it's not that. It's one, just because of history, like I just said. And if you want, like, to fact check me, read On the Decalogue by Philo, you listener. Because I know there's somebody who wants to fact check me or something. But also, the Ten Commandments show up again. I think it's in Numbers. For some reason, everything I want to say is in Numbers 22. Where is it? Let's see. Yeah, Deuteronomy 5, 6 through 21, and also Numbers chapter 15. And in those passages, we see the Ten Commandments again, and they're phrased slightly differently, so that helps us determine which ones are one commandment. And again, that's not really important anyway, because there's actually, like, there's no such thing as the Ten Commandments, really. There's the 613 commandments, right? Anyway, so starting back at verse 22. Chapter 20, verse 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So God says, don't draw pictures. And then in like one chapter, he's going to be like, okay, so I want you to draw all these pictures and to carve all these images. And notice that when God does that, nobody's like, but God, you told us not to draw pictures of anything. And the reason I'm saying this, obviously people in Bible study who are literally here right now know why I'm saying this. But if anybody listens to this in the future, they're going to be like, okay, what's your point? And my point is, this is like one of those verses that people quote to be against iconography all the time. But if you actually just read it, it cannot be against the veneration of icons. The reason that it cannot be that, and the reason you have to interpret it in context, is one, like I just said, God's going to tell them to draw pictures. But two, it does not end with or anything or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above. It goes on to say, or that is in the earth, or in the water. So by your logic, if you draw a picture of a fish, idolatry. If you think, and this is where it gets worse, right? Because you have mental images. So if you think about, have you ever thought about Jesus Christ? Have you ever imagined him as a person? Boom! Heresy, idolatry. Right, that's silly. You wouldn't be allowed to think about, like, your parents. So this, to use the verse like that, is one, clearly not how they thought it meant, because when God tells them to do those things, they don't go, but God! And also, it's just ridiculous. And the reason, and then we know this because, yeah, anyway, moving on. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. It says here you shouldn't bow down to them. Okay? Well, you got David bowing to the Ark of the Covenant. You got Obadiah bowing to the Elijah. You got the priests bowing to the Urim and the Thummim. You've got, like... So again, they're bowing to the Ark of the Covenant. So how do we make sense of this? What God's telling them not to do is not to be practitioners of idolatry. And idolatry is not liking a thing a lot. Right? Analogically, yes. Like, you can make an analogy that if you spend all day watching football and you never know anything about anything other than football, you say, oh, that's your idol. And that's an analogy. That's not what idolatry actually is. We know that because there are spots in the Old Testament, for example, when the Ephraimites don't want to go to Jerusalem, so they worship Yahweh on Mount Ephraim. And they're worshiping Yahweh. And it says that God killed them all for idolatry. What do you mean? They were worshiping Yahweh. And it doesn't say that they made a picture of him. It just says they didn't want to go to Jerusalem. So what idolatry actually is the pagan practice of making a body for a god so that you can localize it. So the reason that God kills the Ephraimites for idolatry is because God said, hey, I live here, so to speak, in Jerusalem. Now, obviously, he doesn't literally only live in Jerusalem, but you understand the point that he's trying to make. The Ephraimites go, actually, no, you come to us, which is the same thing that the pagans would do when they would say, oh, great, Utnapishtim, enter the clay man so that we can feed you. So that's why this word serve them is important. Again, this does not mean like, oh my gosh, you dusted your icons, you're serving them. No, literally, pagan religion, you would get an idol, you would do this ritual of the opening of the nostrils, right, where the spirit would come and embody the idol, and you would dress it up and clean its clothes and feed it. And there's tons of references, as we're going to see, the particular way that the idols are made. They typically, at this time in history, had the name of the god on their forehead. So if it was Baal, you'd have a little bull statue or a little man statue or a little minotaur statue, and it would say Baal on it. And interestingly,
I've seen one of them.
huh?
I've seen in my religion gen ed
Nice.
at school. This archaeologist lady brought in some.
Oh, she brought in a physical one?
Yeah,
That's cool. Which one was it?
from oh, I don't know. It was a bowl, so probably Baal.
Well,
But
actually,
from, Israel.
I wanted to mention that about Baal and about bulls, because obviously Baal is associated with bulls. So is Zeus, by the way. You know who else is associated with bulls? In terms of archaeology, I'm not.
Yeah.
Huh?
Is that not Yahweh?
Exactly, it's Yahweh. And unanimously, the fathers interpret when they come down, when Moses comes down from the mount with the tablets, and they're all worshiping the bull. None of them go, "Oh, it's Baal." They all say, "Oh, that's Yahweh." They're trying to worship Yahweh with an idol. And so again, right? What separates iconography from idolatry? Well, when I have an icon, I don't think, okay, I'm going to ask God to inhabit this piece of wood and feed it so that God is going to live with me in my house and I can take him around with me. No, I think, oh, this is a picture. And that's what it is. That's the extent of it. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, moving on. Where were we? Oh, right. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. So what does it mean to take the name of the Lord in vain?
Say things in the name of God that are not in the name of God.
Yes, and also no. So it depends on what you mean.
Okay.
Because nowadays you have this idea that if you go, "Oh my God," that's taking the name of the Lord God in vain. That's not exactly it. The way that the fathers interpret it is two ways. One, they say that when you say something like "in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit," you shouldn't take that in vain. But particularly the more common interpretation is it's having to do with marriage. Taking the name. And of course this is only really a thing in the post-Constantine fathers. Because you couldn't actually take a last name until after Constantine, right? Because they didn't have any. But the point is still the same. So taking the name of the Lord your God is being united to him. I.e. calling yourself, right? Because what does Ian mean in Greek? Means son of, right?
Follower of. Son of.
So someone who is a Christian is not just a little Christ. No, it's a son of Christ, right? You're literally taking his name. You're a Christian. So one who takes the name of the Lord your God in vain is the same thing. This is the same thing that Paul says, right? When he says, "He who has the name of a brother and is not one, do not even eat with such a person." This is where Paul's getting that from. Anyway, next, going on. Also, consider how literal this is in terms of Israel, right? Because you've got Rehuel. What does that end in? Oh, it ends in L. What does L mean? Oh, it's God's name. Okay. So everybody's name ends in L. So that's not a coincidence. Anyway. 6 days, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. So, as Christians, do we observe the Sabbath now?
Yes.
Well, religiously, yes. Whether or not we as persons actually, take some rest. And here, rest does not mean, go have free time. Well, I mean, it does, right? But it means use your free time for God, right? That's why it says remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So if you're just gonna, like, oh, it's the Sabbath day, let me scroll on Instagram Reels for hours and hours. That would not be honoring the Sabbath any more than like, doing like your normal business would. But also, the bishops have made, not only in our century, but in pretty much every century, exceptions for people who literally cannot, right? Like if you have a job and it's like you have to work on Saturday, but let's say you get Monday off, then Monday's your Sabbath now because God's not petty. But yeah, this is also why you have Vespers. Because Vespers is the Sabbath. And of course, liturgically speaking, Vespers is actually Sunday. But but if we were really doing things, we would have Vespers at like not when we have it, because things shift over time. But yeah, so we have the Sabbath and we have Sunday, right? And in English, right, we have Saturday and Sunday because we've stuck with Rome, right? But in languages like Spanish, you have sábado from the word Sabbath, right, for Saturday, and domingo for Sunday. Domingo as in domini, as in Lord, as in Lord's Day, right? And then in Greek you have Kyriaki, right, from Kyrios for Lord, Lord's Day. So yeah, we still do the Sabbath, and even Ignatius talks about the Sabbath, and this is where weekends come from, right? Because you get Saturday for the Sabbath and Sunday for the Lord's Day, and this is also why on Sabbath we do things at night, right? Because night is solemn, right? Vespers, and then on Sunday it's a party, right? Because it's the resurrection. So we do it in the morning when the sun comes up. Because when the sun goes down, time to go to bed, get some rest. When the sun comes up, it's time to... the coming up of the sun is, obviously resurrection, but also it's waking up. So it's just time to go do things. Anyway. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Now when all the people saw the thunder and the flashes of lightning, and the sound of the trumpet and the smoke, and the mountain smoking, the people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off, and said to Moses, You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, lest we die. Also, I think it's funny. You know how, like, in Germany, during like the period of high textual criticism, there was that time where like everyone had to say, yeah, we think the stuff in the Bible really happened, but we think that all of it had some really particular and niche scientific explanation. There's certain ones of the reformers, like not very popular ones, who literally think this is a volcano.
Nice.
Which I think is hilarious, because you have to be imagining that, like, there's a volcano there, and Moses is going into the active caldera of an active volcano, and all the other guys are just, like, not worried about the lava, right? It's very silly. Yeah. But, like, I think it's Karlstadt who says that. But anyway, moving on. Moses said to the people, Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. The people stood far off, while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. Dionysius' favorite verse right there. Because he talks about the thick... I'm not going to talk about that right now, because we just talk about nothing except Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was for the rest of for hours and hours and hours and hours. But like the TLDR is that thick darkness is a sort of oxymoronic thing, right? Because darkness is absence and thickness implies substance. And so this darkness is the darkness which is outside the world. Like, it's like what non-existence has non-existence. But it's only described analogically, right? Because you can't actually comprehend that which does not exist. Because for St. Dionysius, what we experience is nothing, right? So like the nothing that is in my hand right now and the nothing that is under my bed is not actually nothing. And the way he concludes that is because nothing has a logos. And you can conclude that because what's in my hand is not the same as what's on a blank canvas, and yet they're both called nothing, because they share the same logos. And if they have a logos, that means that they pull from the logos, which means that they were created. So, and this is why you get the famous in Meister Eckhart, right, he says the opposite of something is not nothing. The opposite of something would be whatever this incomprehensible thick darkness is. Anyway, and the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me." Oh, what? The gods of silver to be with me. What does that mean? Again, this goes back to the whole idol thing. He's saying, literally, like, be with me here means what I was just saying about the way that we don't conceive of icons, right? So he's literally saying, don't make little idols for you to carry around to be with me, because I just talked to you from heaven, right? That's God's point here. You see yourselves that I talked with you from heaven, i.e., I'm transcendent. Therefore, you shall not make little toys that are that you're gonna try and get me to possess. Nor shall you make for yourself gods or idols of gold. Well, what shall they do? An altar of earth you shall make for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness be not exposed on it. What? So this part's fun. I remember the first time I encountered this part, I was like, what does this mean that your nakedness be not exposed on it? And this is actually a phrase that appears a lot, particularly in the law. It has to do with essentially looking up people's cassocks. So he's saying you don't go up steps to an altar because then people are going to look up your skirt, so to speak. Now, obviously, God's not really concerned with looking up the skirt. The point is, you don't want to build fancy pants stuff because it'll expose you as pompous. And so this part about your nakedness being exposed is more of a pun. Not to say that God literally cares about whether or not someone looks up your skirt, but it's sort of a, or they're going to look up your skirt metaphorically and literally. Which is, of course, a motif that God uses even in the New Testament, right? Because Jesus always makes, like, a time is coming and now is puns. Also, we're going to see, I don't remember when we see this, but when Moses finally makes this altar that he's talking about, he uses 12 stones. And I like that because God didn't tell him to use 12 stones. God just told him to use stones that he found lying around. But anyway, he used 12 because, you know. Now we get to the fun part, and this is the part that I actually want to have the Bible study on, now that we're an hour in. But I had to preface with all of the, elders and stuff, because that's super important context. Because if you don't understand that, you will completely misinterpret everything as being like like God's just like super harsh. Basically, you'll read Yahweh as Yaldabaoth. Anyway, now these are the rules that you shall set before them. When you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. Which is like a Sabbath year, right? If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone. Slavery! Okay, so some things that are important to note. 1, Moses is writing to a whole bunch of former pagans, right? We know that, 1, because, you have this whole misreading of Exodus, right? Where, people think that God said, whoever puts blood on the door, I won't kill. That's literally not what it says. God says, whoever is an Israelite, I will not kill their firstborn. I mean, he even says, thus I shall make a distinction between the Israelites and the Egyptians. And then Moses says, here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to put blood on the door. So whoever put blood on the door is an Israelite. That's why it says that there were 600,000 men, and then with women and children, 2 million in all, who left Egypt. And then Paul says in the New Testament that there was 430 years between Abraham and the Exodus. So if we use that logic, if Columbus shipped 150 Abrahams over to America when he came over, and that's the only people in the whole United States, so to speak, then by now we would expect to have the current population of America. But obviously that's ridiculous. It takes way more than 150 guys to make 300 million people in 430 years. That should cue to us that a lot of those people were ethnically Egyptian. That's why you have people like Phineas, right? Penehas, literally meaning black man, dark-skinned man, whose mother is Pudiel, which means woman from Libya. Okay, well, you expect me to believe that he is ethnically descended purely from Abraham? That's also why tons of Egyptian names exist in Israel forever, right? There's so many Egyptians that even like when we're in the Babylonian exile period, there's Israelites who have Egyptian names. And that's also why they turn to idolatry so fast. They're not just dumb, right? We read the Old Testament like everybody's stupid. And I have to, this isn't even relevant, but I just have to get this off because somebody said it to me recently again lately. Right? The fathers, when the word of the Lord comes to a certain prophet saying something, that's the word of the Lord, i.e. Jesus Christ going to the prophet and saying something. And that's why that's the way it is in the iconography. They're not just sitting there and then they're like, they just hear a voice, Elijah. Yeah? No, that's ridiculous. And this is why in Jonah it says that he was fleeing from the face of the Lord and he was actually going to a different place. Jonah wasn't an idiot, right? This reading of Jonah where he's like trying to run away from God is really arrogant of people to read it that way, actually, because it just assumes that Jonah was an idiot and that, well, we're smart enough to know better than that idiot prophet. No, there was an actually, in fact, it's so crazy, right? Because it's actually like, no, actually, you're dumb. Actually, you can't read because the word of the Lord came to Jonah, which means an actual guy named Jesus Christ. Well, he was named that later. That's why in Revelation, right? He says, my new name. He says that in the book of Revelation. What's his new name? Right? You have all these people nowadays wondering, I wonder what his new name will be. No, guys, his new name is Jesus Christ. That's the point. Anyway, so all that is that the Israelites don't turn to idolatry so fast because they're dumb. Also, like, how would they know to even do that? Right? Let's say that wasn't a thing that they did because they were Egyptians before. Give me an instance of someone... Right, like if you just like had a child and you never taught them about religion, which is pretty much everybody in the United States now, right? They're like, okay, I'm gonna get a rock and I'm gonna pray to it. No, that's ridiculously stupid. You would have to assume that whoever does that is an idiot, right? In contrast, in reality, the pagans, the Egyptians who became Israelites, had a very sophisticated theology of idolatry. It just happened to all be wrong. Actually, it wasn't wrong, right? I mean, a lot of demons really did possess those statues, but they were demons, so that's bad. But the point is, it wasn't stupid. They weren't dumb. The reason they're doing that is because they were Egyptians. So you have to consider that Moses is speaking to these people who live in a context already. And in the ancient Near East, right, every city was basically a city-state on its own. And we see that Abraham comes from Ur, right? And Ur is like everywhere is just blended together. You don't really have a government that like expands across multiple cities the way it does now until you have like the Babylonian Empire, right? And then that falls, and you get the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and then you get the Persian Empire, and then you get Rome. Oh, and you have the Assyrians too in the midst of that, and that's basically it. Other than that, it's just like a whole bunch of city-states. So everybody's cultures kind of blended together. And I mean, Moses even makes reference to old books, right? So, for example, in Genesis, Moses speaking about, right, when he says like the sons of God or the Septuagint, the angels came down to the children, the daughters of man, right? The Nephilim story, you know? And what does Moses say? Moses says, these were the men of old, those of renown. Well, what? Referencing old books? And this goes to the whole thing, right? The Atrahasis epic, which is a flood story, which is actually older than the Epic of Gilgamesh. Everyone hears that the Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest story because the Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest story in terms of extant manuscripts. But all scholars agree that the Atrahasis epic and the Utnapishtim flood story are older, partly because Gilgamesh explicitly references the Utnapishtim flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So it has to be older. But the point is, all those stories, even if you date Moses to the latest you could date Moses, are like way older than Moses. So when Moses is giving them the flood story, he's not like, hey guys, here's some facts that you've never heard of before. We know that he's not saying that, one, because that's historically unlikely, and he explicitly says in the passage, those are the guys that you heard about before. Right? So Moses is speaking to a people who have come from an ancient Near Eastern culture. And so in an ancient Near Eastern culture, when you have a slave for 6 years and then you just let him go at the 7th year, that's a revolutionary idea. And as we're going to see later, if you kill your slave, you get put to death. If you knock a single tooth out of your slave, you have to let him go, according to the Torah. Right? So slaves are here not property, because if I destroy my table, I don't get put to death. If I chip the edge off my table, I don't get put to death. Right? So, are you saying the Bible is in support of slavery? Yes and no, right? No, in the sense that not the slavery that was being practiced then, nor the slavery that was being practiced in antebellum America. But indentured servitude? Yeah, the Bible is in support of indentured servitude. And there's really no way to get around that, right? But is indentured servitude actually bad? No, not really. It's actually quite good, right? If I said, imagine this, right? And this is what the Torah says, right? So imagine you have $800,000 in debt. And I say, okay, you can either live by yourself, right? And pay me basically half your salary forever till I get my $800,000 back. Or you could work for me for 6 years. And as we're going to see later in the Torah, no matter how large your debt is, you always only work for 6 years, and the 7th you get let go. No matter how large the debt is, and the debt is always paid off. So if you were an ancient Near Eastern guy, you'd be like, what kind of liberal guy is this Moses over here telling us we're going to be put to death for killing our slaves, telling us to let our slaves go after 6 years? Also keep in mind, right, because here it sounds really bad if you don't read closely, right? Well, the wife and the children are the masters, and he keeps her. Oh, he only keeps her for, at maximum, what, 1 more year, right? Unless that wife married that servant in the last year of his servitude, which is pretty unlikely, then he will probably only have the wife and the kids for like a year more. And notice, the next thing Moses is about to say, I'll just read it. This is starting at verse 5, chapter 21. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, what? I love my master? That's crazy. Because again, this is indentured servitude. You don't have people out here beating their slaves. That's not a thing. That's why if you kill your slave, you get put to death. And if you beat him, you get punished and he gets let go. Right? And that's also why the Israelites, right, they're like, we want to go back to Egypt. Because archaeologically speaking, like if you read Herodotus, right, Herodotus says that the Egyptians had slaves. And then if you consult a modern history book, it says that the Egyptians did not have slaves. Well, are the modern history books just completely unaware of Herodotus or like the Bible? And again, while obviously secularists wouldn't agree with the Bible, they would at least acknowledge that it has some historical veracity, right? No, they're not unaware of those things. It's just that Herodotus, when he says slaves, he means a certain thing. And the modern history book publishers know that when someone says slaves in a modern history book, the people who are reading that history book have certain presuppositions about what that means. And so the definition of slavery, which we as modernists conceive of, the Egyptians did not have. That's why the Israelites want to go back there, right? If the Egyptians were just constantly like treating them like the way the slaves were in modern times in America, they wouldn't be like, take us back. Anyway, moving on. If the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. Then his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost. And his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall be his slave forever. So what is this? Isn't this kind of strange, right? Bring him to God, bring him to the door or the doorpost, and then they basically pierce his ear. Now, if you're really familiar with the hymnography surrounding the Theotokos, this might resonate. Because one of the things about the Theotokos that we hear all the time is that she conceived through her ear, which is a funny turn of phrase to mean that she was obedient to God, and by virtue of her obedience, she bore Christ. And the fathers say that it's not even as though God, well, obviously it's not as though God picked her name out of a hat, right? But the fathers even go further. They say it's not even that he picked her in a perusing the options sense at all. It's that she partook of the divine nature through theosis to such an extent that the divine nature partook of her nature. In other words, it was not by virtue of she did good and God rewarded her for it transactionally, but it was actually through a sort of intimacy with God, by virtue of obedience and love for God, that she conceived Christ. And that's why it says that she conceived through her ear. Anyway, what is the Theotokos constantly referred to herself as in the scriptures? I am the handmaid of the Lord. Be it unto me as you say. Right? The handmaid of the Lord, the handmaid of the Lord. Handmaid is a nice term, right? The slave of the Lord. And so here we have to God, to the doorpost, right? So where are we? Well, this is one of those anachronistic things, and people don't like probably what I'm about to say, but there's tons of anachronisms all throughout the Old Testament, right? Like when Abraham gets called, it says that he was called from Ur of the Chaldees, right? And when Abraham was alive, there was no Chaldees. Obviously, there was Ur, but there was no other Ur, and there were no Chaldeans. And when Moses is writing, there are still no Chaldeans, meaning that part of the Chaldeans was an edit added after Moses. Well, why would they do that? Because, in the time of the Babylonian Empire, for example, there were multiple cities named Ur, because Ur literally just means city. And so there became more of them. It means a city in Ugaritic. And so they had to say, Ur of the Chaldees, right? So there's tons of edits. And for one, like, the Jews aren't quiet about this. And if you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, counter to what Wes Huff would like you to believe, or what Gavin Ortland would like you to believe, there's 2,600 differences between the Qumran Great Isaiah Scroll and the Masoretic texts Isaiah, and that's not accounting for orthography, meaning not accounting for spelling or synonyms. So there's 2,600 real differences, because there were edits to them. And there's edits to the Gospels, right? John 21 explicitly says in the text of John 21 that it was not written by John. It says, these are the words of the disciple whom he loved. We know that his testimony is true. Okay, that doesn't sound like John speaking. And St. Justin, who went to church with John, also explicitly says that John 21 was an addition from the elders of Ephesus. But this isn't spooky at all, because we believe in tradition. If you don't believe in tradition, this is probably very spooky for you. But it's true. Anyway, the point here is, the reason I say anachronisms is because this doorpost with God here refers to the doorpost of the tabernacle, which God hasn't told Moses in the text how to build yet, but he's going to. And keep in mind, Moses is writing this all down after having heard it himself as well. So this doesn't even have to be an editor later in time. This could just be Moses committing an anachronism in terms of the chronology of his own text. But anyway, the point is, it's the doorpost of the tabernacle. What's in the tabernacle? The Ark of the Covenant. Who lives in the tabernacle analogically? Well, God does. Okay. So you've got a person who, out of obedience for God and out of love for his master, and who is a slave to his master, but desires to become part of the family of his master, goes to the doorpost of the dwelling place of God, almost the place that you would go, that God would come through and that you would come through to meet each other, and has their ear pierced, as a sign that they are the family of God now. And so this is what St. Ephrem the Syrian is riffing on in that hymn about the Theotokos conceiving through her ear. Not only is it just, she was obedient, but it's all this referencing to the Torah. And later on he makes it more explicit, right? Like he literally says, for she who went to the door. Huh? What is St. Ephrem talking about there? He's talking about this. Anyway. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. Okay, so notice here. Is it okay, in the other stuff Moses has already written, to sell your family members into slavery? No. Right? Because Joseph. So unless we're going to say that Moses is a schizo, right? There has to be something we're missing here. Because again, it has to do with indentured servitude. Right? So what did Joseph's brothers do? Well, they literally put him in a hole. They basically kidnapped him and sold him to foreigners. That's not the same as what this is talking about. Anyway, if she does not please her master, who has designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. What does that mean? That means he gets a refund. he shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people. Oh, what? Ah, see? Since he has broken faith with her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her as with a daughter. Why? Well, because he's literally marrying her out to her son. If he takes another wife to himself, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. So food, clothing, that makes sense, right? What is marital rights? In other words, he's saying, if the person who has bought this girl from her dad decides that this is going to be his wife, but then he takes another wife, he still has to have sex with the first girl so that she can have kids. That's what it refers to as marital rights, right? And again, you have to read everything in the context of Moses correcting the culture. Because Moses has already said that you're not supposed to have multiple wives in the text of Genesis. So why is he here saying that it's okay? Well, because he's not saying it's okay, right? But he knows that things are going to happen. Again, in the what is this for, right? This is for judges to make rulings on. So if we're going to read this like secularists do, then we should get the Constitution and all the laws of the U.S. government and be like, so you're saying it's okay to do anything the law even references as being a fact of reality, right? It's completely incoherent. It's completely incoherent, right? To read other cultures' laws like that would be very stupid. Yeah. So the point is, Moses wants this girl to have marital rights because she doesn't have kids. She's basically screwed. Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint for you a place to which he may flee. But if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, you shall take him from my altar, that he may die. So my altar here refers to the place to which he may flee, because these were essentially like churches, except they didn't really have many services there. This is why you get the whole idea of refuge in a church in Byzantium, right? And when I say the whole idea of refuge in a church, I don't mean people hiding in a church just because it's a building, but in Byzantium, right? People would hide in a church from people who were trying to attack them. And the Continental in John Wick, the other guy would just go into the church with them and they would stop fighting. And this is where that comes from. Whoever strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. Interesting. Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him, shall be put to death. What? But I thought slavery was okay. Again, you have to read everything in context, right? Whoever curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. Curses has to do with cursing. Not F you, but may Allah bring punishment upon your family, right? When men quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone, although some translations do read disrespect, but I think that's stretching it. In other words, I disagree. When men quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and the man does not die, but takes to his bed, then if the man rises again and walks outdoors with his staff, he who struck him shall be clear. Only he shall pay for the loss of time, and shall have him thoroughly healed. When a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged. In other words, the guy gets put to death. But if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged. So what is this saying? It's saying the same thing it just said about the other guy, right? Right. So if the other guy walks outside, you don't put him to death anymore. So if the slave survives, you don't put him to death anymore. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman, strive together. What a translation. When two men are fighting together and hit a pregnant woman, so that her children come out, so that she has a miscarriage. Oh no, never mind. So that her children come out and there is no harm. So it's not a miscarriage. That's the next verse. The one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. The judges determine, But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So it's hard to argue from this that abortion is okay from the perspective of the Bible. Right? Although there have some, I'm not even kidding, who are like, oh, well, you know, that baby only had eyes but not teeth yet, so you can pluck out my eyes but not my teeth. Anyway, moving on. When a man strikes the eye of a slave, male or female, and destroys it, he shall let the slave go free because of his eye. If he knocks out the tooth of his slave, male or female, he shall let the slave go free because of his tooth. Moses, this dirty liberal, right, is what all the hearers would be thinking. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall not be liable. But if the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, okay, so I'm going to pause there, right? Think about if this was a thing that is imposed all the time, and the judges are not allowed to discern, how little sense that makes. When an ox gores, kill it. But if it's gored in the past, how can it gore in the past and not be dead if you just said that when it gored, you would die? That doesn't make sense. And its owner has been warned but has not kept it in, and it kills a man or a woman, again, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. If a ransom is imposed on him, what? If a ransom is imposed on him, you just said he should be put to death. Then he shall give the redemption of his life whatever is imposed on him. If it gores a man's son or daughter, he shall be dealt with according to this same rule. If the ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So why are they giving their master 30 shekels of silver? Is it to pay for the slave? No. It's to pay for the work that the slave would have done. In other words, you don't have a guy to do job now, so I give you money so you don't starve in winter. When a man opens a pit, or when a man, I read that, I just read that. Or when a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restoration. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead beast shall be his. So why does he get the dead beast instead of the owner of the dead beast? Well, because you can't eat an ox or a donkey. So you just got this dead corpse around, and you have to deal with it. So it's actually a punishment. Obviously, you can literally eat an ox or donkey in the sense that it's possible, but as an Israelite, you're prohibited from doing so. When one man's ox butts another's so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and share its price, and the dead beast also they shall share. Or if it is known that the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has not kept it in, he shall repay ox for ox, and the dead beast shall be his. If? What do you mean if? Torah? Moving on to chapter 22. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen on him, there shall be blood guilt for him. What does that mean? That's a weird translation. In other words, if you kill a thief at night, that's one thing. But if there's a thief in your house and it is daytime and you see him and you don't have to kill him and you kill him, that's bad. He shall surely pay. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the stolen beast is found alive in his possession, whether it is an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. If a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed over, or let his beasts loose and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best in his own field and in his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so that the stacked grain or the standing grain or the field is consumed, he who started the fire shall make full restitution. If a man gives to his neighbor money or goods to keep safe, and it is stolen from the man's house, then if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house shall come near to God to show whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. For every breach of trust, whether it is for an ox or for a donkey, for a sheep, for a cloak, or for any kind of lost thing, of which one says, "This is it," the case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. So how do you guys think God can? How do you think God picked? Hello.
I don't know.
The elders, the judges picked, and whatever the judges pick, that's what God picks. Paul makes reference to
My
this.
bad, my phone was on the opposite side of the room because it's
Sure, it
dying.
was. Sure.
What are you accusing me of?
I don't know. I'm just being strange. No, but Paul makes reference to this, right? When he's talking about the Christians and he rebukes them for going to secular courts, right? His point is that he's getting all this from the Old Testament. They should go before God, i.e., where? Before the bishops. And this is in the canons of the church, right? Like if you go, and this is why, not to bring up current events or to bring up controversy, right? But in the current half schism between the Russians and the ecumenical patriarchate, even though ecumenical His Eminence Patriarch Bartholomew is kind of sus sometimes, the Russians shouldn't have gone to court about it, right? Paul would have excommunicated him for that, whereas he wouldn't have excommunicated His Eminence Bartholomew for being a bit sus. But anyway, you go before the bishops. And in the canons of the councils, if you don't go before the bishops and you sue someone who's Christian, then you're excommunicated. Now, of course, this is complicated for us, right? Because for us, Christian just means all those different religions which have the same name, even though they're not very similar at all. So if you're Orthodox, that's one thing, right? If you can get a Protestant, if the Protestant will agree to let's go before your bishop and let him decide, then yeah, by all means, you should do that. But that probably won't happen. Yeah. Anyway, if a man, because what is it again? All throughout Exodus, when it says "come before God," that entails going to the tabernacle or later for the temple. And what is the tabernacle or the temple? For us, that's your local parish, your priest and your bishop. Right, the priest first, and if the man does not accept it, the bishop. Why? Because the authority of the priest always comes from the bishop. If a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to keep safe, and it dies or is injured or is driven away without anyone seeing it, an oath by the Lord shall be between them both to see whether or not he has put his hand to his neighbor's property. The owner shall accept the oath, and he shall not make restitution. But if it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it is torn by beasts, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn. If a man borrows anything of his neighbor, and it is injured or dies, the owner not being with it, he shall make full restitution. If the owner was with it, he shall not make restitution. If it was hired, it came for its hiring fee. If a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed to her, and lies with her, he shall give the bride price for her and make her his wife. So this is a very famous part, right? Why does anybody think this is? In the context of Moses being a not evil guy. I'll tell you. It's because in ancient Eastern cultures, if you weren't a virgin, you just couldn't get married. So you're basically screwed, right? And if you can't get married, you're basically just going to become a prostitute, right? Or die. Those are your two options. So Moses is being very virtuous here. What's that?
Side note, this is why in the medieval era, if a woman was raped, she would marry her rapist. But that does not mean that it was a normal marriage. He could not touch her ever again. He just had to pay for her to live.
Huh. Nice. Well, I mean, yeah, that's definitely basically what this is getting at. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money equal to the bride price for virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Why a sorceress? As opposed to a sorcerer. Reason is because sorcerers were usually parts of cults, but this word in the Greek, it's actually gosh, I forgot what it was. It sounds like some kind of snake. A pythoness or a pythony, right? That's what it is in Greek. In Hebrew, it's kasap, but it's basically like a fortune teller, right? Who typically operate alone, so to speak. Whereas men sorcerers are typically in cults. They had blue-haired white girls even in Moses' time. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. That means if you are
Why?
cuddling with your... Huh?
Why is there a difference then?
Oh, because
Like if
they would kill the cultists anyway. But basically, they just thought about it differently. Like, all the cultists, I mean, you're going to kill them, right? Because when Moses comes down from the mountain, all these cultists, essentially, right, they're worshiping an idol, are there, and he kills them all. But one random chick who like goes into the woods is kind of a different deal.
Gotcha.
Whoever lies to the animal shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. You shall not wrong a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. That's super duper mega ultra radical for the ancient Near East. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows and your children orphans. So notice, if you mistreat a widow or an orphan, then your wife becomes a widow and your kids become orphans. If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him, and you shall not exact interest from him. And this is still true, and this is in the canons of the councils. Interest is bad. And everybody goes, well, are there any exceptions to that? And there are exceptions given by the fathers interpreting the councils. But like those exceptions, like the only one I can think of, is when a man wanted to charge his nephew interest, not because he wanted money, but because he wanted his nephew to learn how to have a job. And the bishops were like, okay. But other than that, it's like, no, you don't charge interest. If you ever take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. In what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest, and from the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with its mother. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. I'm not even kidding. There are actual people who go, oh look, it's human sacrifice. Even though in Exodus already, because this isn't the first time God's given this particular commandment. He gave it when they came out of the Passover, or after the Passover, right, when they came into the Promised Land. Well, not when they came into the Promised Land. After they got out of the water, right? When they crossed the bridge, the land bridge, so to speak. He said, you give your sons to me on the 8th day. And everybody went, okay, we kill them or whatever? And he's like, no, you give a burnt offering in their stead. So, not human, not cannibalism. It's also worth noting that all the sacrifices are always eaten, right? Except whole burnt offerings. But a sacrifice implies eating it. That's why Christ instantiates the Eucharist before he gets on the cross. Because if they did not eat him, he could not rightly be called a sacrifice. Because sacrifices, because of modern Christianity, well, actually, I don't even pin this one on modern Christianity. Just because Christianity's become popular, and everybody thinks about Christ, right? People conceive of sacrifices as having to do something with killing. The issue with that is that you have sacrifices that cannot be killed, right? Like bread and vegetables. I guess you could make an argument that you can kill a vegetable, right? You can't kill bread, though. You can kill grain, not bread. Also, like sin offerings. Right? If penal substitutionary atonement were true, we would expect that all sin offerings would be like a goat or a lamb, even though they didn't actually sacrifice lambs except on Passover, right? Also, again, just because I'm going off on a tangent about penal substitutionary atonement, like penal substitutionary atonement theory, trying to argue it from the sacrifices of the Old Testament is so dumb, right? Because they don't punish the animals; they kill them, right? So, like, if the punishment for sins is damnation, is God like, well, you know what? You did that. You killed like a whole thousands of people. So you deserve to be damned to hell forever. But I'll take a goat. Just kill the goat, and then we're good. No, that's silly. Or worse, right? Just eat some bread, right? Just eat some bread, and then we're good. Because you had grain sin offerings, right? So it's very silly. But the point is, the way sacrifice was conceived of was as eating a meal with your God. And this is how the pagans and the Christians alike conceived of it. That's why every time there's human sacrifice, there's implicitly cannibalism. And more particularly, and this is even just true, like if you read the hymns surrounding the Eucharist, right? Like why are there sin offerings then, if you're not punishing the bread for your sins? Well, because the way it's supposed to go is you go and you confess to the priest, right? Which is a thing in the Old Testament. And then you eat a meal with God, right? Because let's say you and anybody else ever have a falling out, and then you make up. What's the next thing that you're going to do? You're going to go to dinner. So you go to dinner with God. Anyway, and it's just, the sacrifice thing about eating stuff is also implicit with Abraham and Isaac. So it's very like Eucharisty when you understand that, right? Because Isaac is obviously here symbolic of Christ. And notice that Abraham doesn't want to kill him, right? He doesn't know what God says because he's faithful, right? But I can't imagine Abraham's like, I am wrathful. I must punish someone. I will punish my son. No, the whole point of Abraham and Isaac is that it's a metaphor for the father and the son. And notice that Abraham doesn't want to kill him. And all of the fathers, none of the fathers, you interpret the tearing of the veil as like, oh, we don't need rules anymore. Let's not go to church. Let's not have priests. Let's not have a wall at the front of the church. Let's just stay home and read our magic book. All of them do, however, in fact, interpret it as the father rending his garment, like Jewish people would do. So the whole idea that the father is like wrathful and he's like, ah, is number one, not supportable from the Old Testament, not supportable by reason, and not supportable by the New Testament. Anyway. And you say, oh, but Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Just like Isaac could have said on the altar, my father, why are you about to kill me? That doesn't mean Abraham wanted to kill him. Oh, hey.
Hello.
You just missed,
There she is.
you missed the part, yeah.
I missed everything, probably.
You did miss everything. I mean, we're not done yet. I'm going to keep going until everyone's gone. No, but we missed the part where we talked about Hebrew slavery, indentured servitude, and all the context and stuff.
Ooh.
Also, this is important for context, so I'll just say it again real quick. But in Genesis 18, which is where we started, Exodus 18. We're in Exodus 23 now. Jethro comes to Moses and he is like, hey Moses, you can't do all this by yourself. And so Moses appoints elders or judges to make rulings about things, which is why the law comes next. Because whereas before Moses was just making rulings, so he could just make the rulings. Now you have to have a code book for the various judges to make rulings about. And we talked about how there are 72 of those elders, which is why Christ appoints 72 apostles in Luke 10:10, as deliberately paralleling Moses, because Christ is setting himself up as a new Moses. And also that these elders, when they were all in a group, were called the Sanhedrin, and that in Second Temple Jewish literature, like the Babylonian Exegete, the authority that the elders had was called the authority to bind and to loose, which obviously Christ references. And so that's all good context for the New Testament. because if you were a Jew and you heard Christ, who had 12 disciples and 72 apostles, say to those guys, I give you the authority to bind and to loose. As a Jew, you would know that Moses had 12 patriarchs and 72 elders, and that he gave them the authority to bind and to loose. But what does that mean? That means that they make rulings, which is why Paul, right, and this is where we were actually just talking about. Paul says in the New Testament, he tells them not to go to secular courts, but to go to Christian courts, because that's the point of apostles or bishops, and also that the bishops were the ones with the authority to make rulings about things. And like the word for bishop, right, is in the New Testament. It's translated in the New Testament in Protestant translations as overseer. Remember, the word is episkopos, which comes from the word for shepherd, which is a thing that the elders were called. It's not their official title. It's one of the things that they were called. Also, you would make these elders with the laying on of hands. And what does Paul say to Timothy? That number one, he tells Timothy that he was appointed by the laying on of his hands. Right? He says, "Do not let them despise you on account of your youth. Say unto them that you have been appointed by the laying on of my hands." Well, that's not some ritual Paul came up with. That's a thing they'd been doing since Moses did it to the 72 elders. Anyway, so that's all the necessary context. So we're in Exodus 23. What's that? So you're really quiet. Let me turn you up.
Oh, sorry. My mic might be far away.
No, it's just because I have you turned
I was
down
just
for some
saying.
reason.
Oh, gotcha. I was just saying it was cool.
Yeah. Oh, also we talked about there's like some deliberate parallelism between the resurrection in the like boring part. The reason, so this Bible study, the reason I was doing it, and the reason we started Exodus 18 is because I want to go through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, because those are super boring to people who don't have the context necessary from the ancient Near East. And so we talked about some deliberate parallelism with a slave becoming a member of a family, and how that's deliberately paralleled and even referenced by the fathers, such as St. Ephraim the Syrian, as being paralleling the Theotokos, and also the resurrection paralleling Moses going up on the mountain. Anyway, verse 1, "You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with the many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many so as to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit," which is like, the temptation of communism, essentially. "If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him." In other words, don't leave the donkey of even if it's somebody who hates you's donkey being crushed, and don't run away. Not only because it's not good to do bad things to those who hate you, but also because it's just a jerk thing to do to the donkey. "You shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in his lawsuit. Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. You shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of those who are in the right. You shall not oppress a sojourner. You know the heart of a sojourner, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt." So that's like the third time he said that. And again, that's super, super, duper, mega, ultra radical for the ancient Near East. "For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its field. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field may eat. You shall do likewise with your vineyard and with your olive orchard." They never did this, by the way. The Jews never did. The Israelites, never did this. We know that they never did this because I think it's in Jeremiah. No, it's in Daniel. Daniel says to them, let me make sure. Yeah, because it's the Babylonian exile. Yeah, Daniel says that they're going to have 70 years of Babylonian exile because never mind. I was wrong. It was Jeremiah. Never mind. I was wrong again. It wasn't Daniel. It's Daniel 9. I'm tripping right now. Yeah, it's Daniel 9. He says, pull it up here. 70. Well, there's somewhere where he says that they owe him 70 years, essentially, because it's been 490 years and they've never done the Jubilee year. Here it is. And them that escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept the Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. In other words, that the land will catch up on all the Sabbath years that they never gave it. According to, because they're supposed to follow this commandment that says to give the land a Sabbath, right? They never did. Sorry, I was absolutely tripping there. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your servant woman and the alien may be refreshed. Alien here as foreigner, not as extraterrestrial. Pay attention to all that I have said to you, and make no mention of the names of other gods, nor let it be heard on your lips. And again, legalism isn't a thing in ancient Israel, so it's not like if you were like, oh, well, I've heard that the Babylonians worship, Baal and Utnapishtim. God would be like, oh, you said Utnapishtim! 3 times in the year you shall keep a feast to me. You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. As I commanded you, you shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days at the appointed time in the mouth of Abib, for in it you came out of Egypt. Okay, so there's like a billion reasons, right, why I have unleavened bread. The first reason that Moses himself gives when he tells them to do the Passover before they even leave Egypt, right, because he actually tells them to not make leaven for their bread before they leave Egypt. And the reason he tells them that is because you ain't got time to wait around and wait for it to rise, literally. Like, you ain't got time to keep that yeast colony. You gotta get out of here. So that's the very first reason that Moses gives. The reason that we use leavened bread, and actually during the Great Schism in Michael Cerularius' letter to Peter II of Antioch, where he's complaining about the Romans, the Patriarch of Rome, the Pope, one of the things Cerularius critiques the Pope for is for using unleavened bread. Cerularius says we should use leavened bread, because the reason that they used unleavened bread in the Old Covenant was because of, and the reason that it's now leavened is because of the symbolism of the crucifixion. So to use unleavened bread ignores the symbolism. And again, like I said at the beginning of this recording, right, Paul says in Hebrews, when there's a change in the priesthood, there's necessarily a change in the law. And elsewhere he says, do we then abolish the law by our faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. But the law of commandments as expressed in ordinances has been renewed. So we keep the same principles, but we have new ordinances, which is to say new symbolisms. Because the old symbolisms, their fulfillment did its thing. The feast, you shall keep the feast of harvest, of the first fruits of your labor, of what you sow in the field. You shall keep the feast of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in from the field the fruit of your labor. So the feast of unleavened bread, right, is the Passover. And so obviously we keep that. That's Pascha, right? That's Easter. And it's worth mentioning here, since we didn't start from the beginning of Exodus, that in the Septuagint, it's actually only in the Greek in the Septuagint, that it says the Red Sea. In the Hebrew, it actually says the Sea of Reeds. And that has nothing to do with the fact that red and reed sound similar. That just happens to be a coincidence in English. And it's actually not like some sort of translational drift either. In the Hebrew, it probably originally said the Sea of Reeds, right? And the Greek, the 72 translators, interpreted it. It's an interpretation that it was the Gulf of Aqaba, the Red Sea. The reason it says Sea of Reeds is because that happens to be the same place. But the Sea of Reeds is what the Egyptians called it. The reason that that's significant is because in pagan religion you have this idea of cosmic geography, right? So like the river Styx, it's in the underworld. It's also a real river, right, in North Africa. Or the Acherusian Lake, right, which in the underworld is where the people would drink Lethe to forget their memories and become reincarnated in Greek mythology, is also a real lake in Greece. So they identified these mythological places with these real places. And in Egyptian mythology, the Sea of Reeds is basically the same thing as the River Styx. It's like this river in the underworld you have to get through. But some people get caught in its reeds, and so they're there forever. And so that Moses takes the chosen people through the Sea of Reeds and into the Promised Land is like, when you think about it like that, it's just totally wink wink, right? For like the harrowing of Hades, right? Christ goes to Egypt, right, where Pharaoh lives, right, and he steals the people from Pharaoh. He resurrects them, right? Matthew 27, and then he takes them to heaven. So it's literally the Passover. Now the Feast of Ingathering, where we gather the fruits of our labor, I want to say that corresponds to the Transfiguration. Lauren, you might remember. Which feast is it that everybody brings their vegetables?
It's like
I think it's the Transfiguration. It is! It's the Transfiguration. I remember now. Because the Feast of Ingathering is the Feast of Booths. And that corresponds to the Transfiguration because Peter was like, hey, you want us to make you guys some tents. Yeah. 3 times in the year, or I'm sorry, not the Feast of Ingathering, the Feast of Harvest. 3 times in the year you shall all your males appear before the Lord God. You shall not offer blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened, or let the fat of my feast remain until the morning. Again, the reason leavening is the same symbolism. Like in other words, I already talked about that. The best of the first fruits of your ground you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Now this is fun, right? What is this? What? Boil a young goat in its mother's milk? Well, this has to do with pagan religion. And this is a motif in pagan religion that persists up until Greek mythology. In like really old, in like back when, Hera still had a cow head, like times of Greek mythology, Dionysus, there's this story about Dionysus where he's boiled in his mother's milk. And there's like similar stuff in Ugaritic religion, and so it's this pagan religion that was sort of going around. And continued to go around basically until like the time of Plato. Yeah, they did it with Enlil. That's the Ugaritic goddess. I don't remember the one that was actually boiled, but I remember the story that Enlil's milk, she's also called Ea, is the one that her son gets boiled in, but I don't remember her son's name. But anyway, moving on. In other words, like, for the Jews nowadays to keep doing this, right, for them to interpret like, oh, well, you can't have cheese on a burger because that cheese might be from the cow that's on the burger or from its mom or something. Well, 1, that's just astronomically unlikely. But 2, like, there aren't any epidemic weird boiling, like, that just misses the point of the thing. And that's the thing, is like, St. Maximus likes to say that the sin of the Pharisees is actually that they were not educated in the law enough. And you can argue that Christ says this, right? Because he says, you neglect the weightier matters of the law. You should have done these without neglecting the others, right? He says, you tithe your dill and your, thyme and your cumin, and you do well. But you have neglected tithing your mercy and justice. You have neglected the weightier matters of the law. You should have done these and not neglected the others. But notice he doesn't say, you shouldn't tithe from your dill and stuff. Just be nice. He says, no, do both. And this is Paul's point too, right? Circumcision is indeed of value if you keep the law. But if you do not keep the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. In other words, cutting off the little flap as if it's a magic thing that's going to do something is dumb. But if you understand what you're doing, that's good. So the thing about the Pharisees is actually that they just looked at the law and they go, okay, I guess I'll do what the law says. Instead of being like, why? Which is God's point. Right? And the people who did ask why, right? Like the goat, Philo, right? Not only did Philo instantly convert when Peter and Mark came to Alexandria, but to quote Philo in 30 BC, right? Why does it say he spoke, that we might wonder to whom did he speak it? For in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? John quotes Philo because Philo was so in tune with what God wanted the Jews to get out of the law. And ironically, right, where did Philo live? Egypt. So, yeah. Anyway. Behold, I send a messenger before you to guard you on the way, and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Pay careful attention to him, and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. What does it mean that his name is in him? So his name is Yahweh, right? And it's not really a name, right? And you'll hear people say that Yahweh means I am. That's actually just literally not true. I am is what he says before that, right? He says, Yahweh, Yahweh, right? I am that I am. But then he says, Moses goes, what should I tell them? And he says, tell them that Yahweh sent you. And Yahweh is causative, right? It's third person causative. So it means something more like he who causes to be. Emphasis on the fact that it's third person. Anyway, so the name is he who causes him to be. And so the fathers speak about the name, right? Because this phrase, like God's name being in something, happens all the time in the Old Testament. As we're going to see later, he says that his name is in the temple. And in another place, he says that his name surrounds the temple. How does a name have sort of some locale that surrounds the thing? The name, saying his name, is an epithet for the Spirit. That's how the fathers interpret it. And this is why you see some traces of this within Judaism, right? Like in the Sefer Yetzirah, which is like, it gets picked up by the Kabbalah guys later, but it's not Kabbalah, because it's before Kabbalah. They talk about the name of God being places and of being God, right? Because again, the Second Temple Jews were a lot more Trinitarian, or at the very least Binitarian, than we give them credit for. So the fact that his name is in this messenger, the TLDR here, right, is that this is unanimous from the fathers, is that this messenger is Christ, right? And like to show you how, so one of my favorite midrashim is the Apocalypse of Abraham, and in the letters of Gamaliel that we have in the Babylonian Talmud, Gamaliel references this Apocalypse of Abraham, and particularly Gamaliel references it as speaking of Abraham as the archetypal Jew and the archetypal Gentile. Because in the Apocalypse of Abraham, I should probably say what a midrashim even is. A midrashim is a commentary that serves as an expansion of the story. So, like, it's basically a parable, but instead of being like a random king, it'll be like Elijah. And a lot of the midrashim, they perceive them as historically accurate, but not historically accurate in the details. And we basically have to accept that, because if we don't accept that, then you get all these weird things in the scripture, right? And Paul makes reference to a lot of midrashim, right? So, for example, Paul says, just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses. It's like, who is Jannes and Jambres? Well, if you read the Bible alone, you wouldn't know, right? Jannes and Jambres are the names of the two magi who opposed Moses with the snakes and all that. But they only received those names in the midrashim. Anyway, the Apocalypse of Abraham, like I was speaking about, in it, Abraham reasons to God first, and then God reveals himself to him, which is why part of the reason Gamaliel picks it up to exemplify how Abraham is the archetypal Jew and the archetypal Gentile, right? And Paul says in the New Testament that Gamaliel was his teacher. So the fact that Paul makes the same reference, right? Except Paul points out that Abraham was sacrificed in the halfway point of his life so that he could be the archetypal Jew and archetypal Gentile. But the fact that Paul picks it up from his teacher Gamaliel, and that Gamaliel picks it up from the Apocalypse of Abraham, is extremely significant. But anyway, I bring up the Apocalypse of Abraham at all because in the Apocalypse of Abraham, there's this guy who shows up to Abraham, who identifies himself as God, but who is also identified by the narrator as a man. So there you just have like, oh, okay, that if you don't have Trinitarian theology, right, it doesn't make sense for God to have even locale. So you have that. But then this man has a human face, right? It expressly says that he's a human. And in the text, his name is Yahweh, which means he is God. So there's a man who shows up to Abraham, and his name is He is God. So the Jews were super Trinitarian. But I mean, like literally the whole John, all of John's theology, right, comes from Philo, basically. And I mean, part of the reason, like, right? John's called the beloved disciple. And the fathers say that doesn't mean Jesus actually loved him more for like no reason. It's a way of saying that he was basically like the class pet. And the reason he was the class pet is because he knew what was up, so to speak. That's why if you look at an icon of the Transfiguration, you'll see that Peter and James are like hiding their faces on account of the light, and John's just like sitting there looking at it. Because John knew what was up. And the reason John knew what was up is because he read Philo, basically. Because he's read all these deep texts, so he knew what to expect. Anyway, moving on back in Exodus. So this messenger is Yahweh, right? It is Christ. And I talk about this in the essay Intro to Christ, where I list as many pre-incarnation apparitions as I can think of. When my messenger goes before you... Oh, I skipped a verse, sorry. But if you carefully obey his voice and do all that I say, notice his voice and all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. When my messenger goes before you and brings you to the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites, the Hivites and the Jebusites, and I blot them out, you shall not bow down to their gods nor serve them, nor do as they do, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their pillars in pieces. You shall serve the Lord your God, and he will... So notice, God's still talking, right? I send a messenger, right? And then he says, you shall serve the Lord your God. So he again refers to it. And he will bless your bread and your water. And I will take sickness away from among you. So you will serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water. And I will take sickness away from you. Super first person, third person shifting all the time. Because the subject matter is shifting away from what it shifted to, which is the messenger of the Lord, who is the Lord. Right. The second hypostasis. None shall miscarry or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. This isn't true, right? We have to keep in mind that if we go, we have to also keep in mind there aren't chapter breaks. Because how did God start all of this off with? He said, if you do, and then he starts listing the commandments, and finally we get to people won't miscarry. So all of the stuff in between if you do and none shall miscarry has been the content of what you need to do for the covenant. I will send my terror before you and will throw into confusion all the people against whom you shall come. And I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites from before you. This is clearly very reminiscent, right, of Revelation. Which is actually, maybe I should put an appendix in my Chiliasm article, because this serves as a refutation of Chiliasm, right? Because who's God speaking to here? Israel. Okay, who's he speaking to in Revelation when he says the same thing? The church. And again, right, like, I actually don't understand how Chiliasm even exists, right? Because in the Greek Old Testament, the word often used to describe Israel is ecclesia. And what is ecclesia translated as in the New Testament? Church. Right? That's where we get the word ecclesiastical. So it's like, what? How do you not see this? Right? The fact that Paul, a Jew, calls this gathering of religious people the ecclesia, and Paul explicitly references the Greek, right, in many occasions, right? For one, when he quotes Psalms in Romans 8, he quotes the expanded version that's in the Greek. In the Hebrew, most of what he quotes isn't part of that psalm. And also, Paul, right, he says, God said to Abraham, I will bless your offspring. And then Paul says about that, he said offspring, not offsprings, as referring to one, and that one is Jesus Christ. Well, in Hebrew, the word for offspring or seed is zerach. And the plural for seed is zerach, right? It's the same word. It's like deer in English, or fish. So, for Paul to be like, well, he didn't say zerach, he said zerach. That doesn't make any sense. But in the Greek, you have a singular and a plural. So we know Paul appeals to the Greek. So the fact that he calls them ecclesia, and the fact that the hornets parallels and parallels and parallels. Anyway, I'm getting so off track. It's terrible. I will not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you, until you have increased and possessed the land. And I will set your border from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the Euphrates. For I will give the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out from before you. So as I was saying earlier, this is not the land promised to Abraham. Right? These are different borders. And I explained that earlier. You shall make no covenant with them and their gods. You shall not dwell in their land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. Then he said to Moses, now we get to the fun part. Oh my gosh, this is the part I've been waiting for. Then he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and worship from afar. Moses alone shall come up near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with him. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord, and all the rules. And the people answered with one voice and said, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Ha ha, very funny. And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. He rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain. And here it says translated 12 pillars, but I prefer the translation 12 stones, right? And this, because, and we know, how do we know it's 12 stones and not 12 pillars, right? Because what did God tell Moses to make the altar out of earlier? He said stones, and he told him not to use any tools on them. So the fact that it's translated pillars here is kind of dumb, in my opinion, because it's actually stones. And again, God didn't tell him to use 12, right? So the fact that Moses uses 12 of his own accord, I just think it's kind of cool, right? Because we know that there's 12 patriarchs, which Moses has under him, right? So even Moses likes symbolism, according to the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he threw against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people. This is like there's like a few times, I think there's only 3 times, I'm pretty sure, that blood actually gets put on people. One is this, and this is a one-time event, right? So this isn't going to happen again. This is not a repeating ritual in Israel. Then there's the ritual of the ordination of priests. Now that is a repeating ritual. And I think we're going to read about it here in like 3 seconds. Might be the next chapter. If we don't read about it, I'll explain it. But I think we will. I hope we do. And the third time is the Day of Atonement ritual. And it doesn't expressly say in the text of the Bible that people get put blood on them. But Barnabas and the Jonathan Targums say that they do. From the goat that gets offered to the Lord on the Day of Atonement. Anyway, for one, right, Jesus says in the Eucharist, this is the blood of my covenant poured out for many, or poured out for you, depending on which gospel you're reading from. So that's a reference to this. And also, right, in Matthew, when Jesus is about to be crucified, all the people, right, Pilate goes like, he washes his hands, and he says, his blood is on my hands. And what do the people say? His blood be on us and our children. Parallelism, right? Anyway. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant. And so, like, Jesus is literally referencing this. That the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up. And they saw the God of Israel. Even though 3 chapters ago, actually it's more than 3 chapters ago. Either way, actually maybe it's in the future. Man, I don't remember. It's been a long time. But, you know, it says no man can see God and live, right? In the text of Exodus. Obviously it says that in John, but John's quoting it from Exodus. So how do you explain that? And this is the thing, right? Like I said earlier, there's tons of anachronisms in the Old Testament. And as I said earlier, we know that people edited it because we have manuscripts which have 2,600 differences not accounting for orthography. So the idea of the modern secularists that, like, you have all these guys editing the Old Testament, right? And all these great theologians like Philo and Hubadak and Gamaliel. And they were just like, yeah, we'll leave the part about not being able to see God and seeing God in there. It's like, no, actually, they were already Unitarian or Trinitarian. Anyway. There was under his feet, see how he has feet, right? There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, that I may give you the tablets of stone with the law and the commandment, which I have written for their instruction." So this word stone here is super vague. It's the same word when God makes Adam, right? Which is variously translated as clay and dust. And in another spot, this stone is translated onyx. Right? So this word means anything from stone, dust, clay to onyx. Anyway, the reason I say that is because Philo and a lot of the other Jews, they didn't think it was stone. They thought it was actually like a typical writing tablets. Anyway, moving on. But again, some of them did think it was stone. So it's not a universal interpretation, even among the fathers. So Moses rose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, "Wait here for us until we return to you. And behold, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has a dispute, let him go to them." So notice, Moses says to the elders, so these are the 72 elders, whose job it is to settle disputes. If you have a dispute, go to Aaron and Hur. Who were the 72 apostles of the New Testament supposed to go to? Peter and Paul. Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the 7th day he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. So, everybody knows about like 40 days and 40 nights, all the stuff in the Bible. But why? Why is it always 40 days and 40 nights? Well, it's like, and again, right, the Bible rounds numbers all the time, right? Because you have 72 elders and 72 apostles, but very often they'll just say 70. And these are one of those cases. Because 40, or 42, you might say, is 6 sevens. Ha ha, funny joke. And it's almost 7 sevens, which would be like, oh, very good. Same with Pentecost, right? Pentecost, the reason they waited around for Pentecost, 50 days, really 49 days, for the Holy Spirit to come, is because they had to wait around for 7 sevens. Because it has to do with waiting around for something to happen. Or preparation, you might say. Hence, Lent, right? 40 days of Lent is preparation for Pascha. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel, that they take from me a contribution. For every man whose heart moves him, you shall receive the contribution from me. And this is the contribution you shall receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue and purple and scarlet yarns, and fine twined linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, goat skins, acacia wood." Oh, this word, acacia wood. It might say in your Bible, incorruptible wood. Because that's one of those words that, like, kind of nobody knows. Oil for the lamps, spices for the anointing oil and for the fragrant incense, onyx stones and stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece, and let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. Okay, so again, you got the waiting around for Pentecost almost, right? And then what happens right after Pentecost in the New Testament? Peter and Paul say to all the people, "Hey guys, go get all your stuff and bring it to us." Right, which is what's going on here. And then Ananias, right, and Sapphira lie about how much property they sold, and then God killed them. Anyway, then let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst, exactly as I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle and of all its furniture, so you shall make it. This is the fun part. This is the fun part. Everything else has been meh, but this is where it gets fun. They shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2 cubits and a half shall be its length, a cubit and a half its breadth, and a cubit and a half its height. You shall overlay it with pure gold. Inside and outside you shall overlay it. And you shall make on it a molding of gold around it. And you shall cast 4 rings of gold for it and put them on its 4 feet. 2 rings on the one side of it and 2 rings on the other side. And that's for the to carry it with the poles. The pole goes in the ring, so you can carry it around. Oh, no, it says that. You shall make poles for of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. And you shall put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark to carry the ark by them. Hold on. I want to check something. I think in the Septuagint it has bronze here. Am I tripping? What chapter is this? 25? No, never mind, it's gold. Where's the bronze come in? Bronze. Okay, bronze doesn't come in until chapter 27. Okay, well anyway. The bronze is very exciting to me. We'll get to that when we get to that. And you shall put into the ark of the testimony that I give to you. So the poles shall remain in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it. And you shall put into the ark the testimony that I shall give you. So you shall put into the ark the testimony that I will give you, the tablets. He means. Here we go. What is that? Is anybody reading along? Perchance? If so, tell me what it says. You shall make a blank in verse 17. What does it say in everybody's different Bibles?
What's the chapter?
25.
I got mercy seat.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Yeah, okay. So, mercy seat. What is this? This is all the KJV's fault. The word here is kaporet, right? Which is related to the word Yom Kippur, right? The Day of Atonement. Yom as in day, Kippur, atonement. Why is it called the Day of Atonement? I hate to break it to you, but it has nothing to do with atoning for their sins. Obviously, the Day of Atonement was for that. That's not why they called it that day. The reason they called it that is because this word atonement is a word that Wycliffe made up because he didn't know how to translate this word. And when Wycliffe made it up, he took the English words at one. It's at one meant. And so that's how we translated cabaret and Kippur and all the KFR word series. The transliteration, I mean, KFR. And so that's where we get that, right? But what it actually means is to cover, which is what atonement means, right? When you're atoned by Christ, you've been covered, right? And under Jesus, right, he even says like, cover your brother's faults, right? So the reason it's the Day of Atonement is because what do they do, right? Everybody thinks of the Azazel goat because that's all I talk about. But there's also the other goat, right? The goat that they kill. And what do they do with its blood? They smear it on everything. They cover everything in the blood. So it's the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, because they cover everything in blood. Not because it's, well, I mean, it does atone for the sins sacramentally, not as though a goat can actually atone for your sins. But as imaging Christ, it does. But that's not why they named it that. And so this word mercy seat, it came about because they didn't know, like I said, Wycliffe didn't know how to translate this word. And so when King James comes along and they translate the KJV, they're like, okay, this is the place on Yom Kippur that they smear the blood, right? And this is the place, again, they have this very judgmental view of the Day of Atonement, right? For them, they're punishing the goat, right? So the blood gets put on the God's seat, where they punish the goat. And so you get a mercy seat, because it's where God sits, right, on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And it's where they smear the blood, and so they get a mercy seat, because it's the blood of mercy, it's where he sits. But literally translated, it just means a cover. Because my problem with the translation mercy seat is that unless you lived in our culture, right, which is one in which people already know because of like Indiana Jones and stuff, like what the Ark of the Covenant probably looked like. But if you didn't know that, you'd imagine like there's a chair. There's a chair on the top of the Ark of the Covenant. But yeah, this word just means cover. And we actually get the word cover from the Hebrew KFR word series. Kippur, cover. Throw in some time and Greek people. And that's how you get that. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to see if anybody had cover. Because I'm reading, so I have the ESV pulled up on my laptop, and I have the RSV as a real book. And then I have the Brenton's Septuagint as a real book. And in Brenton's Septuagint, it has cover. In RSV, it has cover. And in the ESV, it has mercy seat. Anyway. 2 cubits and a half should be its length, and a cubit and a half its breadth. Again, notice there's no depth, because it's not actually a chair. And it honestly just kind of bothers me that they translate it like that. Because the same people who say, no tradition, are just blindly following this tradition. Because the word chair is not even there at all. Anyway. And you shall make 2 cherubim of gold. A hammered work shall you make them on the 2 ends of the mercy seat. So, everyone's probably seen the icon of Our Lady of the Sign, it's called. Pull it up real quick. I'll send it to the chat. Sorry, listeners, in the future, you can't see it. Just Google it. This icon, right? You've got Mary with 2 cherubim next to her. Because Mary's the Ark of the Covenant, and the 2 cherubim are the 2 cherubim. Particularly, they're meant to represent Archangels Gabriel and Michael. And then why is Mary the Ark of the Covenant? Man, we could do a whole Bible study on that, but just a quick rundown. Right? In the Ark of the Covenant, you have Aaron's staff, which buds, virgin birth. You have a golden jar full of manna. And what does Jesus say? I'm the bread of life, right? The Ark of the Covenant itself is where God sits. Notice Jesus' positioning within the icon. Also, in 2 Maccabees, Jeremiah hides the Ark of the Covenant in a cave, and his disciples are trying to find it, and he goes, no, guys, I hid it because I didn't want you to find it. Duh, are you stupid? And then he tells them, no one shall find the place until the power of the Most High comes upon it, and the glory of the Most High shines upon it. And what is Archangel Gabriel to say to Mary? The power of the Most High shall come upon you, and the glory of the Most High shall overshadow you. Gabriel is literally quoting Jeremiah in 2 Maccabees. And where was Jesus born? Yes, in a manger. Yes, in a barn, but not a stick-built barn. Not according to the fathers. He was in a cave. And this is why in the icons of the Nativity, he's in a cave. So you've got that. You also have the fact, there's this wonderful part in the Old Testament where David goes to the temple, right? So he goes there. And he gets there. And he says to the high priest, why is it granted to me that the ark of the Lord should come to me? And the high priest is basically like, what are you talking about? You came here. And then that's the part where David goes and it says that he danced, or he leapt in front of the Ark of the Covenant. So what's the order of events here, right? David goes to the Ark of the Covenant and asks why it came to him. And then it says that he dances or leaps in front of it. And then you read the news. And before that, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention not the most important part, but one of the important parts. It says that David, before that, he goes to the hill country of Judah. And in the New Testament, right, Mary goes to Elizabeth's house in the hill country of Judah. And it literally says in the New Testament, in the hill country of Judah. And what does Elizabeth say? Quote, why is it granted to me that the mother of the Lord should come to me? And then what does John do? He leaps in the womb. So you see the parallelism. Let me respond to Ethan's message real quick. And that's just some of the stuff. Like we could do like an infinite Bible study on that topic alone. For example, one of my favorite ones. Earlier I mentioned Jannes and Jambres, right? To go back to them. So like I said, their names are not actually in the Old Testament, although Paul uses them. In the Old Testament, right, if you read where Pharaoh calls the priests to come fight Moses in terms of staffs and snakes, you'll read that he called a lector priest, it says, or a ritual priest, it might say. And when I say might, I mean there's 2 priests he calls. And it'll say he called a lector priest and a ritual priest, or it might say he called a priest who could read and a priest of the temple or something. And what it's trying to translate there are these two things, which essentially translate to priests who could read and ritual priest, right? But what does that actually mean? Well, in Egyptian mythology, you have this whole kind of homunculus idea, where the priests would ejaculate and use their own seed to try and do magic. And there's what a great time to join, Ethan. You're like, what is time? What are people talking about?
What are you talking about?
But yeah, so they would use their seed, and there's a very famous Egyptian myth where there's these two wizards dueling in the Nile, and they just keep ejaculating into the river. But that's part of the subtext of the story of Moses and the two magi, right? So one of these, it's implied by the subtext that this is what's going on when the magi's staffs turn to snakes. And notice Aaron does not need to do anything of the sort, right? So the fathers call Mary the staff of Aaron, right? Anyway, back to what we're talking about after that random, lengthy escapade. Where were we? Oh, cherubim, right. Make one cherub on one end and one cherub on the other end. Also, I guess it might not, people who are listening to this on the Substack, if maybe anybody does, or if they listen this far. I didn't realize how long we've been going now. A cherub is not like a little baby. A cherub is more similar to a griffin. But it's not that either. If you want to look up what a cherub is, if you look up realistic cherubim, you're going to get some Tumblr art piece where someone read Ezekiel and didn't read anything else. And they made a horrific monster. And again, biblically accurate angel things are cool. But you have to base it on more than one passage in the Bible. If I say cherubim icon. Yeah, if you search cherubim icon, there's one that has the four heads, right? The ox, the man, the lion, and the eagle. That's more like what it would have been like. Or if you just Google what Ark of the Covenant picture, it's basically what it looked like, probably. Anyway, moving on. You shall make a table of acacia wood. Oh wait, I skipped another verse. Oh, I skipped a whole bunch. The cherubim shall spread out their wings above, overshadowing the mercy seat, the cover, with their wings, their faces one to another. Toward the cover shall the faces of the cherubim be. And you shall put the cover on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I shall give you. There I will meet with you, and from above the cover, from between the two cherubim. So notice, the reason, like I said, they translate it as mercy seats, because that's where he is. He's above the cover, but there's not actually a chair there. From between the two cherubim that are on the ark of the testimony, I will speak with you about all that I will give you in commandment for the people of Israel. Also, right, whenever the saints, and by saints I mean both those in and out of the Bible, have visions of God, he's always surrounded by the cherubim, right? And even in the hymns, right, we say, and it's literally called the triumphal hymn of the angels, right? Right as the priest is sensing the Eucharist, and we say, man, I'm losing my mind right now. Now we may receive the King of all, who comes invisibly upborne by the cherubim, or by the angelic host. And by the way, that's the third oldest Christian prayer outside the Bible in terms of archaeological evidence and extant manuscripts. The first, the oldest Christian prayer outside of the Bible, in terms of manuscripts, and again, excluding pre-existing Jewish prayers, is more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compared than the seraphim. Thou who without seed bore God the word, true Theotokos, we magnify thee. And if you want more about that, it's an essay on the origin of intercessory prayer. But anyway, moving on. You shall make a table of acacia wood. 2 cubits shall be its length, a cubit its breadth, a cubit and a half its height. You shall overlay with pure gold, and make a molding of gold around it. And you shall make a rim around it, a handbreadth wide, and a molding of gold around the rim. And you shall make for it 4 rings of gold, and fasten the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. Close to the frame the rings shall lie, as holders for the poles to carry the table. You shall make the poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold, and the table shall be carried with these. And you shall make its plates and dishes for incense, and its flagons and bowls with which to pour drink offerings. You shall make them of pure gold. and you shall set the bread of the presence on the table before me regularly. The bread of the presence. Talk about the Eucharist. Talk about real presence in the Eucharist. Doesn't get much more explicit than that. And by the way, the fathers say that there was real presence in all the sacrifices of the Old Testament. Right? They were sacramental too. And this isn't some late father thing, right? Like you have Hippolytus, right, in the 2nd century, late 2nd or early 3rd, whose book is called On the Apostolic Tradition. And his interpretation of St. Paul saying for us to become living sacrifices, because again, sacrifice didn't mean death, didn't mean killing, because you can't kill bread. And they gave bread for sin offerings. But again, I already talked about that in the beginning. But it was actually the presence of the Holy Spirit is what St. Hippolytus interprets St. Paul as meaning. Right? A living sacrifice means that you are like the Eucharist, like the bread of the presence, like, an ox or whatever they're eating at the time. You have the Holy Spirit in you. The presence of Christ is in you, really, is what the point is. But obviously also, take up your cross, crucify yourself. But that's not the main point of what he's saying in that particular passage. Obviously, that is the main point in a cosmic way. Anyway, you shall make a lampstand of pure gold. The lampstand shall be made of hammered work. Its base, its stems, its cups, its calyxes, and its flowers shall be of one piece with it. And there shall be 6 branches going out from its sides, 3 branches of the lampstand out one side, and 3 branches of the lampstand out the other side. It's a menorah. 3 cups made like almond blossoms, each with calyx and flower on one branch, and 3 cups made with made like almond blossoms, each with calyx and flower on the other branch. So for the 6 branches going out of the lampstand. And on the lampstand itself there shall be 4 cups made like almond blossoms, with their calyxes and flowers, and a calyx of one piece with it under each pair of the 6 branches going out from the lampstand. We should just do a study about like the menorahs in like Maccabees and stuff later. So I probably won't talk about it right now, just because that would take forever. Their calyxes and their branches shall be of one piece with it, the whole of it a single piece of hammered work of pure gold. You shall make 7 lamps for it, and the lamps shall be set up so as to give light on the space in front of it. Its tongs and their trays shall be of pure gold. It shall be made with all these utensils out of a talent of pure gold, and see that you make them after the pattern for them, which is being shown you on the mountain. What does that last verse mean? If anybody gets this, if anybody guesses what that means, they get like infinite coolness points. If you've read Revelation recently, that would help. Well, in Revelation, you have the 7 spirits of God, which, because people don't read enough Second Temple literature, people now have begun to interpret as the Holy Spirit, as if the Holy Spirit exists in 7 hypostases. That's literally heresy, by the way. Like, you're not allowed to believe that. You might as well, you're not allowed to believe that. That's heresy. That's not a trinity anymore. You have a teninity, right? I guess it would actually be a ninity if one of them is like the normal quote-unquote hypostases of the Holy Spirit. No. We know it's not. We know that the 7 spirits who stand before God's throne, and that's the verbiage John uses, are not the Holy Spirit, because in Tobit, Archangel Raphael says, and I quote, "I am one of the 7 archangels which goes in and out before the throne of the Lord." So it's pretty clearly referencing that. Also in Enoch, right, which Revelation explicitly quotes a whole bunch. And if you want to know all the places where it does that, I have an appendix at the end. I added an appendix to the end of You're Going to Want a New Bible that talks about all that stuff. Also, Ethan, we're in Exodus 25. But yeah, the 7 spirits who stand before God's throne are the 7 archangels. So that's what's going on here. That's the pattern on the mountain. Because where's the mountain? The mountain is where heaven and earth meet, right? It's the Har Moed, the Armageddon. Yeah. But also, really, the main point is don't interpret Revelation like that, because that makes you a polytheist. Hold on, did I finish Exodus 25? Okay, never mind, we're on Exodus 26 now. Moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen and blue and purple and scarlet yarns. You shall make with them cherubim skillfully worked into them. So again, supposedly God said early on, don't make pictures of anything. And then he said, okay, I want you to sculpt some angels. I want you to make tapestries of angels. Anyway. The length of each curtain shall be 28 cubits, and the breadth of each curtain 4 cubits. All the curtains shall be the same size. Also, why is he telling them to make angels, right? It's not just for decor. It's because the worship that they participate in, they're participating in the worship of heaven. And that's why it's the same in the liturgy. And why are there only angels? Well, because everybody went to Sheol, right? But then at a certain point, the saints entered heaven, right? That being the resurrection of Christ, right? They resurrected and he took them up. And so it is natural that the Christians would not just put angels, but put saints too. Welcome to an Orthodox church. Because it's the pattern shown again, like as he's just said at the end of the last chapter, the pattern shown him on the mountain, right? God's commandments to build all the things in this way, or because he's showing him the pattern on the mountain. You understand what I mean. I can't talk right, but you get the point. 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another, and the other 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another. And you shall make loops of blue on the edge of the outermost curtain in the first set. Likewise, you shall make loops on the edge of the outmost curtain in the second set. 50 loops you shall make on the one curtain, and 50 loops you shall make on the edge of the curtain that is in the second set. The loops shall be opposite one another. Oh, I should also add, as a bit of historical flair and fun, that when Justinian was building the Hagia Sophia, he says, right, that he was shown a pattern. Right? And this isn't like super spooky, because as we saw earlier in Exodus, right, when God shows up on the mountain, he says, set a perimeter around the mountain. And if you're really familiar with like the life of St. Constantine by Eusebius, right, you'd be like, Constantine! Because all the time Eusebius calls Constantine a new Moses, and according to Eusebius, an angel showed Constantine where to put the borders of the city of Constantinople. So not only is there tons of parallelism with the New Testament and stuff, this is one of the things that is great about saints, right? Is like all of the fun parallelism that exists in the Bible is multiplied by all the stuff outside the Bible. And one of those is this. So there's tons of parallelisms between Constantine and Justinian and Moses. And Justinian and the Hagia Sophia is one of these, right? And when the Patriarch of Jerusalem walked into the Hagia Sophia, what did he say? He said, Justinian, you have put Solomon to shame. And this is why, right? What do the saints say, what do the scriptures say about the abomination of desolation? Where will it be? It will be in the temple, right? And you look at the Muslim last imam, right, who will rule on the earth for 1,000 years from Jerusalem. Who does that sound like? The Antichrist, right? And so that the Hagia Sophia is a mosque, and it is like the temple, like the tabernacle, built according to the pattern on the mountain. A lot of the saints of the time were like, oh, this is the abomination of desolation. And they weren't wrong, obviously. Because there's tons of abominations of desolations. Even in the prophecy in Daniel says that, right? Which is part of the language that John picks up when he says, for even the Antichrist is coming, indeed, many Antichrists have come. Anyway, moving on from that. Where were we? And you shall make 50 clasps of gold, and couple the curtains one to the other with the clasps, so that the tabernacle may be a single whole. You shall also make curtains of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. 11 curtains you shall make. And there's tons of, even in the Old Testament, there's tons of parallelism to other parts of the Old Testament, right? So, for example, Moses, when he gets put in the water, he describes the basket that he's put in as being in proportion to the ark. It's essentially a scaled-down ark. And it even says that it has pitch on it like the ark does. And so later in the Old Testament, when we read that Elijah wears a belt of camel or goat's hair, depending on how you translate it, or actually depending on which manuscript you're using as well. Because in the Hebrew it's clear, in the Greek, there's different Greek manuscripts exist, some of which have camel, some of which have goat. But either way, the ones that have goat right? You'd be thinking of this. The length of each curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the breadth of each curtain 4 cubits. The 11 curtains shall be the same size. You shall couple 5 curtains by themselves, and 6 curtains by themselves, and the 6th curtain you shall double over at the front of the tent. Wait, that makes sense. Just as like a door. You shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in one set, and 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in the second set. Here we get to the bronze! You shall make 50 clasps of bronze, and put the clasps into the loops, and couple the tent together that it may be a single whole. So what makes bronze so exciting? Man, I love this part. This part's so fun. And from here on out, we should see a lot more bronze. And why do we see more bronze? Because we're going in and in more to the sacred things, right? We're also going out, actually, at the same time. But especially when we get to the grill, which there is a grill. This is kind of fun. There's going to be a lot of bronze. And all the clasps are going to be made of bronze. And if I remember right, some poles are going to be plated with bronze. The reason bronze is so exciting is because this takes place historically after the Bronze Age collapse. Does anybody have an idea of what event in the Old Testament the fathers identify with being responsible for the Bronze Age collapse? You could probably guess this one. I should add. Well, I'll tell you. So the Bronze Age collapse, what happened is that the Babylonian Empire, existed. And later on, we're going to have another Babylonian Empire, right? Like Nebuchadnezzar, Nabopolassar, right? Those guys are the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But before this, there's a Babylonian Empire. And it's not the one that we usually think of when we say Babylonian Empire, right? Because we're usually thinking of stuff that's like more in the Bible. And the Babylonian Empire, the first one, is in the Bible, but it's like very short-lived. Anyway, the Babylonian Empire, because of how much space it covered, and because it was really the first civilization that had the logistics to ship things, they made bronze, right? But after historically, what it seems happened is almost like climate change. And because of the climate change, people moved to areas that were more fertile and more moderate. The thing about moving to places like that is that people already live there, right? So basically, it was like an ancient Near Eastern apocalypse. And everybody forgot how to make bronze. This is why the Iron Age comes after the Bronze Age, even though bronze is better. Because everybody forgot. To the extent that, like... let me see here. I have... there's this journal of archaeology that I really like, that I reference a lot. It's the one that I reference in about Og's bed, right? It's the one that records. It's the edition where they found Og's bed. But anyway, here it is, yeah. There's a Philistine temple that has bronze cogs and bolts in like the holy place of the temple. Because nobody knew how to make bronze anymore, so they like revered it. And this is part of the subtext when Goliath shows up, right? And he's wearing bronze. And not only does it go like, oh, and Goliath who showed up in bronze armor. The actual text of the Bible, he goes, and he had a bronze chest plate, and he had bronze cufflinks, and he had bronze, it like lists all the stuff. And it's like, and this was bronze, and this was bronze, and this was bronze. Because bronze is like, whoosh, you know? Like if you had something that was made of bronze, that was like your most prized possession. So the fact that all this stuff is made of bronze is actually, in the context of the time, it's like, okay, that stuff's gold. This stuff's bronze. Whoosh. Gold was still more valuable in an economic sense than bronze, but bronze was more valuable in a religious sense. Like, there were some people at the time who thought bronze was magic. And in the legends of Hammurabi, right, so there are historical documents in terms of Hammurabi, and then there are pseudepigraphal legends. And in these pseudepigraphal legends, like, it says that Hammurabi invented bronze, because, I guess, some context for Hammurabi. Hammurabi claimed to have antediluvian knowledge given to him by spirits, who were ghosts from before the flood. And Hammurabi, right, he eventually was the king and all that, but Hammurabi, the people whom he was the king of, were the Amorites, or, as you might read in the Bible, the Amorites. Right? The Amorites are literally the people of Hammurabi. And in Solomon, when not in Solomon, but when Solomon asks for wisdom, after it says that God gave it to him, it lists, and it goes, and Solomon was wiser than, and it lists all these people. And one of them is Hammurabi. Now, all those people are people who claim to have antediluvian knowledge. So God's literally saying, ha, you might have knowledge from evil spirits, but I'm better. Get wrecked, basically. Anyway, back to the actual text. Yeah, so you shall make 50 clasps of bronze, and put the clasps into loops, and couple the tents together, that it may be a single whole. And the part that remains of the curtains of the tent, the half curtain that remains, shall hang over the back of the tabernacle. And the extra that remains in the length of the curtains, the cubit on the one side and the cubit on the other side, shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle, on this side and that side, to cover it. Or, if you so chose, to atone for it. And you shall make for the tent of covering, you shall make for the tent a covering of tanned ram's skins, and a covering of goat skins on top. You shall make upright frames for the tabernacle of either acacia or incorruptible wood, depending on your translation. 10 cubits shall be the length of a frame, and a cubit and a half the breadth of each frame. There shall be 2 tenons in each frame for fitting together. So shall you do for all the frames of the tabernacle. You shall make the frames for the tabernacle, 20 frames for the south side, and 40 bases of silver you shall make under the 20 frames. 2 bases under one frame for its 2 tenons, and 2 bases under the next frame for its 2 tenons. And for the second side of the tabernacle, on the north side, 20 frames. On their 40 bases of silver, and their 40 bases of silver, 2 bases under one frame, and 2 bases under the next frame. And for the rear of the tabernacle, you shall make 6 frames. And you shall make 2 frames for the corners of the tabernacle in the rear. They shall be separate beneath, but joined at the top, at the first ring. Those shall be with both of them. They shall form the 2 corners. And there shall be 8 frames with their bases of silver, 16 bases, 2 bases under one frame and 2 bases under another frame. You shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames of the one side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames of the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames of the side of the tabernacle at the rear westward. The middle bar, halfway up the frames, shall run from end to end. You shall overlay the frames with gold, and shall make their rings of gold for holders for the bars, and you shall overlay the bars with gold. Then you shall erect the tabernacle according to the plan for it that you were shown on the mountain. It occurs to me, I forgot to actually correlate the Bronze Age collapse with the thing. It's the Tower of Babel, right? Because during the Bronze Age collapse, it was the Babylonian Empire, and it collapsed. I'm not even kidding. Like, this is actually true. In the middle of building this giant tower in the middle of Babylon, and the name of the tower was Babili. Right? And you Babel, Babili. Oh, that's like the same thing. Interestingly enough, when Nebuchadnezzar became the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, he finished the tower. Interesting thing. But he didn't use it for its original purpose. Right? Its original purpose, according to the Old Testament, right, would probably be something like a ziggurat. But anyway. Whereas he just was like, nice tower. Where is that? Then you shall erect the tabernacle according to the plan for it that you were shown on the mountain. And you shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. It shall be made with cherubim skillfully worked into it. And you shall hang it on 4 pillars of acacia overlaid with gold, with hooks of gold on 4 bases of silver. And you shall hang the veil from clasps, and bring the ark of the testimony in there within the veil. And the veil shall separate for you the holy place from the most holy. So notice there's 3 places, right? There's the place, the holy place, and the most holy place. And so, in an Orthodox church, you have the narthex, the nave, and the sanctuary. And like I said earlier, nobody, literally nobody until like, I guess Wycliffe? I can't think of any earlier than that. Actually, Anselm of Canterbury. I'm sure there's probably somebody before him. That's the earliest one I can think of right now. Interpreted the tearing of the veil at the crucifixion to mean like, oh, we don't need a wall anymore. The reason that we know that number one, like I said, nobody interpreted it like that. Number two, the Church of Ephesus, the church that John went to, has an iconostasis there. The Church of Corinth, right, has an iconostasis there, and those iconostases date back to the time. So clearly, John and Paul didn't think they shouldn't have walls there, because they had walls there. Keep in mind, right? They weren't like churches from before there were churches, and they weren't renovated synagogues either, right? They were renovated people's houses. That's one thing. People hear house church, right, and they imagine that like you got a whole bunch of guys in a house, like, taking turns giving sermons or something. No. That's not how it was at all. They would renovate people's houses, right? And what compelled them to do that? Well, probably the commandments of the apostles, for one. But what compelled the apostles to do that? Well, the first thing that God did when he established a people, which is what he just did, right, in the New Testament, in Pentecost, he just established a people. The first thing he did was, here's how you're going to make the church, basically, right? Here's how you're going to design the building that you worship me in. Because that's important. Why is it important? Because it's a pattern shown them on the mountain, right? It's meant to tell you about God. And it does, right? In an Orthodox church, the liturgy is as deep as the Bible. You can sit there and find parallelism, your whole life, right? For one, right, you like, this is all new, and this is just this part in the Old Testament. There's some parallelism with everything, right? With the stories of the saints. The liturgy is, awesome. And the reason the liturgy is awesome is because the liturgy is what God told them to do. Not just through the apostles, right, and through the councils, but through Moses. Right? That's why we use censers. And like I said earlier, right, Paul has to tell them in Hebrews, guys, don't do Yom Kippur anymore. That tells us something about all the rituals Paul didn't tell people to stop doing. Right? And again, he himself says, do we then abolish the law by our faith? By no means. But the law of commandments as expressed in ordinances, by no means we uphold the law. But the law of commandments as expressed in ordinances has been renewed. I.e., same stuff, new stuff, at the same time. Like Christ's body, right? Same body, but also new body, right? Same guy, but unrecognizable. Still physical, but goes through walls. Yeah. And that's why, like, even the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, this is super fun. This is super fun. This is super cool, right? What's in the Ark of the Covenant, right? And where is the Ark of the Covenant? I mean, right behind the Ark of the Covenant is the grill. Or, sorry, right in front of, from the perspective of the viewer, right? But from a perspective of like an over-the-top view, it would be behind. But you go in there and you've got the grill and you've got the Ark of the Covenant, and the grill's not centered in the room; it's still in front of it. And they would take the grill outside for the food, obviously, to cook it, right? Because you don't want to smoke up the inside of the tabernacle. But then they would bring it back in, and you even have like Second Temple commentary, like from the Hubadak in the Qumran. In the Qumran scrolls, what are they called? The Dead Sea Scrolls, I'm losing my mind. Where he's like, no, it's very important that the grill occupies this symbolical place, right? We only take it outside because of the smoke, but it still fits into the symbolical place that it's placed in during the resting time. Anyway, all that to say, what do you have in the Ark? You have the tablets of the law, you have the rod of Aaron, you have a bowl of manna, and you have the Ark itself, right? You go to an Orthodox church, what's there? Well, you have an icon of the Theotokos back there. That's the Ark of the Covenant. You have a gospel book, which is only 4 gospels, and that's the new law. Because it informs the new the updates of the ritualism. You have a cross staff, right? And you have the reserve sacrament. Most people don't, maybe you've never heard of this, but if you look on the altar in an Orthodox church, there's a little box, it's called a tabernacle. That's actually what it's called. And it has reserve sacrament in it. So it just has some Eucharist in there. I can't remember how often they consecrate that Eucharist. I know like once a year, maybe more, they partake of it. I know that they consecrate it on Holy Saturday. That might be the only time of the year they do it. I can't remember if the priests do it any other time. But yeah. So there's deliberate parallelism with that. There's parallelism everywhere. Anyway, where were we? Hanging the veil. Right, that's right. You shall put the mercy seat, the cover, on the ark of the testimony in the most holy place. And you shall set the table outside the veil, and the lampstand on the south side of the tabernacle opposite the table. And you shall put the table on the north side. You shall make a screen for the entrance of the tent. So this is a different screen. Right, so you have the veil between the most holy place and the holy place. Then you have the veil that you go inside with. And that's this one here. Of blue and purple and scarlet yarns, and fine twisted linen embroidered with needlework. You might wonder, what needlework, right? This is why I said that this time we'll read Exodus, and next time we'll read Jonathan Exodus. So what is Jonathan Exodus? So you have those Targums, right, which are the Aramaic Old Testament. But they include commentary from their translators. And there's a certain sect that purport to be translated by Jonathan, as in the Jonathan of the Bible. And he gives commentary, and he tells us more stuff. And Barnabas, in his epistle, quotes from the Jonathan Targums. So after we read through like default Exodus, I figured next time, and Leviticus, and Numbers and everything, then maybe we'll go back and read through Jonathan Exodus and everything. Because he gives more stuff. Like he tells us the exact details of what it is that's embroidered. Anyway, and you shall make for the screen 5 pillars of acacia and overlay them with gold. Their hooks shall be of gold, and you shall cast 5 bases of bronze for them. You shall make the in chapter 27 now. You shall make the oh wow, it's I didn't realize what time it is. I'm surprised you guys are still here. You shall make the altar of acacia wood 5. Wow, sorry, I'm just shocked. When do we start? Like at 9:30? Should we do this for like 3 hours? Okay. Well, anyway, how about we finish? This will be the last chapter. How about that? Because I need to go to bed. You shall make the altar of acacia wood 5 cubits long and 5 cubits broad. The altar shall be square, and its height shall be 3 cubits. And you shall make horns for it on its 4 corners. Its horns shall be of one piece with it, and you shall overlay it with bronze. So this is the grill that I was talking about. And these horns, maybe we'll say it later. I remember them being called meat hooks, but that might just be the translation I was reading at the time. Let's see here. Yeah, here in Brenton's, it's meat hooks. Anyway, you shall make pot to receive its ashes, and tongs, right, and basins and forks and fire pans. You shall make all its utensils of bronze. You shall also make for it a network of bronze. So it's, like I said, literally a grill. And on the net you shall make 4 bronze rings at its corners. And you shall set it under the ledge of the altar, so that the net extends halfway down the altar. And you shall make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with bronze. And the poles shall be put through the rings, so that the poles are on the 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. You shall make it hollow with boards. As it has been shown you on the mountain, so shall it be made. Notice, as it was shown you on the mountain. What does that mean? And that means, as we see in the New Testament, there's an altar there. In heaven, I mean. In the New Testament here, I'm referring to Revelation. You shall make the court of the tabernacle. On the south side, the court shall have hangings of fine twined linen, 100 cubits long for one side. Its 20 pillars and 20 bases shall be of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars and their fillets shall be of silver. And likewise, for its length on the north side, there shall be hangings 100 cubits long. Its pillars 20 and their bases 20, of bronze. But the hooks of pillars and their fillets, right, their fillets, shall be of silver. And for the breadth of the court on the west side, there shall be hangings for 50 cubits, with 10 pillars and 10 bases. The breadth of the court on the front to the east shall be 50 cubits. The hangings for the one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits, with their 3 pillars and 3 bases. On the other side, the hangings shall be 15 cubits, with their 3 pillars and 3 bases. For the gate of the court there shall be a screen 20 cubits long, of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, embroidered with needlework. It shall have 4 pillars, and with them 4 bases. All the pillars around the court shall be filleted with silver. Their hooks shall be of silver, and their bases of bronze. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, the breadth 50, and the height 5 cubits, with the hangings of fine twined linen and bases of bronze. All the utensils of the tabernacle for every use, and all its pegs, and all the pegs of the court shall be of bronze. So like I said earlier about the bronze, and this is true with Solomon's temple, right? Like, was it, it was Pompey, right? Pompey went into Solomon's temple, right? And he was like, whoa! And this is how it would be with the tabernacle, too, especially in the time, right? If you walked in, you were like, you saw this bronze, you'd be like, this is the temple of temples right here. You shall command the people of Israel that they bring to you pure beaten olive oil for the light, that a light may regularly be set up to burn. And so we still do this, right? We have vigil lamps, oil lamps in our churches. In the tent of meeting, outside the veil that is before the testimony, Aaron and his sons shall tend it from evening to morning before the Lord. It shall be a statute forever to be observed throughout their generations by the people of Israel. And that's still a thing in the Holy Sepulchre, right? In Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is run by the Greek Church, Greek Archdiocese. They have a light always burning. Yeah, okay. I read that. Right. Oh, the next part's really good, though. The next part's really good. I guess we'll have to save it for next time. Because to talk about the next part would take a while, because there's a lot of stuff in the next part. Anyway, that's it. Does anybody have anything they want to say? Was it as boring as it usually is when you read the boring part of the Bible? I hope not.
The parallelism is very cool.
Yeah, and you missed a lot of it too. I think you in particular would really like the stuff that we talked about before. But
Yeah.
the next part's really cool. Okay, maybe we'll... Gosh. Okay, we're going to read this last chapter just because this part's fun. Actually, wait, is this the part where he says about the name? Hold on, let me make sure this is the part that I think it is. Breastpiece. Where's his head? Huh. Yeah, this is the spot that I was thinking about. I've never read this part of the ESV, and their translation of chapter 28, verse 36 is so ridiculous. It says they will put a plate of pure gold and engrave on it like the engraving of the signet, "Holy to the Lord," which is literally like if you click on the interlinear and you look at what they're translating from, right? Like I have it pulled up in blue letter right now, and I can just look at what they're translating from. That's literally not what it says, like because it shows you the Hebrew word and then it tells you the dictionary meaning, and it literally just says "Holy Lord," not "Holy to the Lord," because that completely changes the point. The point is, right? They dress Aaron, they feed Aaron. And then they put a hat on Aaron that says God's name on it. Because in the pagan temples of the time, you would dress, clean, and feed the idols, right? So God is setting up the high priest as his own idol, right? And this is a theme all throughout the Old Testament. Like in Genesis, right? It says that God breathed into Adam's nostrils. Now that's a strange turn of phrase, isn't it? That most people don't think of, right? Like, why is nostrils? Because in pagan religions at the time, the ritualism around setting up an idol, it was actually called the ritual of the opening of the nostrils. Because that's when the spirit would come into the being. And so humankind all throughout the Old Testament is the idol of Yahweh. And again, that's not idolatry because it's reversed, for one. But also, like, what's the point of an idol? Well, the point of an idol is that, like, whatever you do to it, you are actually doing to God. And again, not in the sense of iconography. We talked about that at the beginning of this thing. But, like, for example, for example, the voodoo Catholics, and by that's like a real thing. When Catholicism came to, South America, a lot of it got mixed with the paganism that was already there, and so you have the voodoo Catholics. And what they do is, if there's a saint who's not giving them what they want, they take the statue of the saint and they put it in a little jail, right? That would be idolatry. Because but the point is, what are they thinking about? What is the conception about idolatry? It's that whatever you do to the idol happens to the thing that is possessing it. So the reason that God can set up the high priest as his idol is because that's actually true, right? Because Christ is homoousios with us. That's why he says, I tell you truly, in other words, not analogically, I tell you truly, whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. Notice that's pretty much as far opposite as you get from like, I really appreciate what you did for them, and I'm going to pretend like you did it to me. Or, it's a good analogy. No, but truly, whatever you did to them, you did to me. Because he's homoousios with us, right? Anyway, that's like the only part that I really wanted to get to there. The other stuff's important too, but that's the part that I was itching to talk about in the next chapter. But we'll talk about it again next time we read it for the next Bible study. Anyway, that's it. Ethan, do you have anything you want to say? Is Evan there with you?
Nah.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to stop recording now. So say goodbye to the internet, people.
Bye to the internet.
Bye-bye.